What's up, everyone? We're live. That's exciting. Good to be with all of you. I want to preface this is the most involved live I've ever tried with prep and bringing on a guest. So if this goes kablooey, we were predestined to have it happen, okay? I still am a Calvinist deep down, so it's just not my fault. It's God's ultimate decree. So just keep that in mind. But I'm very excited to do this live with all of you hanging out. Of course, feel free to give us a little like button, not a thumbs down button. Someone already did that. I'm like, come on. I haven't even started the live stream yet. But what we're going to do is I'm going to bring on my friend Billy, and we're going to go through a podcast interview with Frank Turek and Melissa Dougherty. So I'm going to bring Billy on. Hopefully this works. First time. Boom! Hi, Billy.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
All right. I'm Billie Hoard. I am a teacher. I'm a trans woman. I write probably more than is good for me on topics like C.S. Lewis and deconstruction and transness generally. I also do a little bit of scholarly writing with my brother.
Awesome. Me and your brother have talked on our podcast a couple months ago. It was actually a fascinating discussion on the theology of disgust, which for some people might sound shocking, but there's actually a whole thing to it. And it was really cool to do that. And so I'm glad to have you on because I saw this interview with Frank and Melissa, and I thought, we should respond to it. And I thought, let me talk to Billy because you bring a lot more of the academic, the research side. I'm more of the maybe cultural commentary side. I think between both of us, we can maybe give this the old college try and gonna go through it piece by piece.
Right.
I did want to start with maybe who we're actually talking about, right? So Frank Turek. Let me see if I can get a picture of him. Do you want to introduce Melissa while I'm pulling up this picture of Frank?
Yeah, Melissa, it sort of seems like has to exist in the context of Frank almost in terms of this video anyway. But she runs her own YouTube channel, and yeah, here's a good picture of her. She actually works for. This is from Frank's website. She's a contributor, I think, on his website. So I think they're doing like a promotional thing for this third edition of his book right now.
Okay.
But yeah, so she's a Christian blogger, apologetics world.
Yeah, and Frank Turek is the founder of Cross-Examined. He is a pretty decently well-known apologist in the evangelical apologetics world. I will say a couple caveats up front. Of course, we're not here to dehumanize anyone during this broadcast, but we are going to respond to some of their discussion that I would argue is pretty ignorant and maybe just not well thought out. I also want to mention that I have met Frank Turek twice in person at America Fest, which is Turning Point's event, and also the Pastor Summit more recently. So Frank has been someone that's been getting more and more embedded in this like far right media pundit world, kind of giving them some of that foundation of like, look, we're rooting this in academics somehow. And Melissa, she actually has a pretty large YouTube account, and she deals in the like Elisa Childers world of apologetics and what is the gospel. Does a lot of stuff against New Age-ism. And I've talked to her in the DMs, and we've had very polite, cordial, good faith conversations. She has approached me, asking me questions. So I want to just preface that I've talked to both of these people. And so if either of them are watching, the goal of this is not to make them look dumb or stupid. It simply is to respond to some of their claims and say, is that the full story? Is that really what's going on here? And then thinking a little bit deeper beyond maybe just whatever they are presenting. So I think that's fair. What do you think, Billy?
I'm looking forward to it. And
All right.
I think that's a reasonable thing to do, right?
I hope so. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to start the video. We'll go through it, and we'll kind of go through it piece by piece. Friends, I can see your comments in real time, so I would love your thoughts as we go along. Feel free to put whatever you think. Respectfully, please. No dehumanization, even if you disagree, or else I will ban you. I had that power. And we'll hop into it. So let's start the video. Hopefully this works. Next scene.
And Frank Turek on
here we
on
go.
The channel to talk about a topic that we're both very passionate about. Frank just expanded a third edition of his book, Correct, Not Politically Correct. And I had the honor of reading this book, and I'm really glad to have him on to talk about some of the topics that are here. Frank, thank you so much for coming on today and speaking with me.
Hey, Melissa, great being on with you. And this is such a hard topic for people that I thought I would write on it. And as you know from the book, I'm not quoting Bible verses. This is not a book that's written to say that because the Bible says, were you taking a natural law, common sense medical case against transgenderism and same-sex marriage, how they're not good for individuals and not good for society as a whole.
Yes, and you do this in your talks as well. When you do your I don't have enough faith to be atheist conferences, what I respect and what I really enjoy is that you start with what is truth, does God exist, are miracles real, right? Before you even get into anything with religion or the Bible or anything. And I think that is very effective. I think that's really cool. Now, okay, this book.
Really quick, I want to interrupt right here. It is important that we understand that they're setting up this conversation to try and almost skirt what they would call their own worldview, like the Christian worldview, to say we can even get to these perspectives beyond using the Bible or using a kind of Christian framework to get here. I think that's important to bring up because I've watched this video now 3 times. I'm not sure if they're exactly successful at doing that, but at least that's their argument starting.
Yeah, and I think, it's worth saying that that's been pretty critically important to the anti-trans movement nationally in terms of a lot of the anti-trans state laws that have been passed recently. There's been a lot of work by originally Christian organizations to launder might be too cynical a word, but to find ways to present their anti-trans position in a way that takes out the religious language in order to make it acceptable to state houses, right? Because we do still have a general expectation of a separation of church and state.
Well, this is kind of similar to the recent Supreme Court ruling, 303 Creative. Even though they used the language of freedom of speech, it was put up by the America Defending Freedom, I think that's what they're called, and that's a Christian nationalist, arguably, organization that whose founder, or at least someone who ran the organization for 15 years, has a book out describing the problem of the homosexual agenda taking over the country, right? So I agree, they've been using different language, but the root ultimately is still the Bible is clear. You have to assimilate, frankly.
Yeah, I just have to say, like, I was struck, and I think it comes up a little bit in the video. Frank's use of natural law language is just it's a weird thing. Natural law, I think I said to somebody, natural law theory is a thing, and he plays around with it. It's a sort of Catholic philosophy coming from the scholastic period. So what he's trying to do there is, on the one hand, maybe there's some roots into it, like Christians, we have that whole history of, like, general grace. But he's doing something very intentional here with this.
Okay, got it.
I remember you talking about this a while ago, and I didn't realize it was this book, but you mentioned that you got fired back in the day for writing this book. I'm wondering if you could start off by telling us a little bit about that. What happened?
Yeah, well, in 2008, I wrote a book called Correct, Not Politically Correct, How Same-Sex Marriage Hurts Everyone. And I didn't write it, again, from a biblical perspective, in the sense that I wasn't quoting Bible verses I just mentioned. I was just making the natural law medical case that same-sex marriage was not good for individuals or a nation. And at that time, even though Cross-Examine had already started, I was only working part-time at Cross-Examine. I was putting my family, when I went to seminary and we moved to Charlotte way back in 1993, I had to make money. So I started doing corporate training for companies. And for many years, I did corporate training for Cisco and also Bank of America. Cisco, not the food people, but the computer people, CISCO, that they're headquartered out in San Jose. Long story short, back in 2011, I was teaching a leadership class at Cisco, and I was fired because someone in the class Googled my name and figured out I had written the book. Now, this is the 3rd edition, but the 1st edition was similar. And they said, well, Frank can't work here because he doesn't agree with same-sex marriage. Now, keep in mind, this was not something I ever brought up in my leadership training. Yet this man who identified as homosexual just figured out that I had written this book and decided that I couldn't work at Cisco. Now, keep in mind, Melissa, this is 4 years prior to the Supreme Court imposing same-sex marriage on the nation.
Okay, I want to pause here for a second. A couple of things I think are important. Number one, this is not just about Frank holding a view personally where he disagrees with same-sex marriages. That's what he calls it. This is about, he wrote a book advocating for the government to continue to restrict the freedom of people who are in committed relationships to be recognized under the law. That's a little bit different, I think, than how Frank is just like, well, I just had this personal belief and I was attacked for it. No, you were a public figure who wrote a book arguing why the nation should not do this. And then he mentions that this is before the government imposed right? Almost making it seem like the government has somehow said, hey, if you're straight, you can't be. You got to get married to someone of the same gender or something like that, right? And so I just have a problem with even how he's framing this to begin with.
Yeah, that reversal, that allowing gay people to get married is somehow an imposition of gay sex on the country, is a really, really strange framing of it, to say the least. I do want to say also, just relating to his story about getting fired, which, I mean, I don't want to, it's painful if you're a contractor and you lose contracts. That's not easy, right?
Yeah,
and I don't want to downplay that. I also want to kind of highlight that his situation is not the situation of somebody who has an employer who literally terminates their employment because of a position they're holding, right? And these two companies just chose not to work with him again, and they decided this, right? That's a little bit different. And given kind of, he's going to get into the government is coming for you language, and I think it's going to be really important for us to make some fine distinctions here with saying what's actually happening and how is it being presented. I think.
Do you think it's a little interesting that folks like Frank who are in this world are very much like, well, the 303 creative case is a win for religious freedom, where this person can say, I'm not going to do this work based on my conscience, right? Thus being able to discriminate against queer people. But now Frank is upset that a business essentially did what he hoped that should be legal in that other case. I just think it's an interesting thing to record. And again, I agree, losing any kind of contract work, especially when you have a family, is very frustrating. I'm not saying it's easy. I don't want to make it seem like, oh, no big deal. But again, it's not just, I had this personal belief. I attended church and they said not good enough. You were a public figure writing a book about this. And that's important to note.
Yeah, it is.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was just agreeing.
Okay.
CEO of Cisco is a man by the name of John Chambers. And John Chambers, in 2008, during the presidential election, was on the Elect McCain Commission in California. He wanted McCain to be the president. And in that election, it was Senator McCain against Senator Obama for the presidency. And so, as you know, Senator McCain served in the Navy, and so did I. So I wrote John Chambers, the CEO of Cisco. I said, thank you for support of Senator McCain in the last election. I am a United States Navy veteran. I was fired from your company because I didn't agree with same-sex marriage. Are you aware that Senator McCain holds the same position on same-sex marriage that I do? Are you qualified to be working at Cisco? So the next day I got a phone call because I FedExed it to his office, and the attorney said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, I don't really want anything except you call the dogs off other Christians. And I was a vendor. I wasn't an employee, so they could fire me for any reason. But I just said, look, I can't understand. You claim to be inclusive, tolerant, and diverse. How was it that I was excluded and not tolerated for holding a diverse view? And the attorney said, well, I could set you up to talk to a lady by the name of Marilyn Nagel. She's the head of our Inclusion, Tolerance, and Diversity Division, whatever that meant, right? I said, okay, let's set up the meeting. So a couple of weeks later, I'm actually at Summit in Colorado, and my friend Mike Adams was there, and we had this call scheduled with Marilyn Nagel. So I asked her, I said, hey, I told her what happened, and I said, you claim to be inclusive, tolerant, and diverse. How is it that I wasn't tolerated? I was excluded for holding a diverse view. And she couldn't answer the question. And I said, what does tolerance mean? What does inclusion mean? What does diversity mean? She couldn't answer any of the questions. And the conversation went so poorly that when it was over, I turned to Mike. I said, we got to go public with this. We've got to tell people, the world, although these people are...
Do you want to take a first swing at this idea? I mean, what Frank, I hear him saying is, hey, I was not tolerated by the people claiming to be tolerant of my position that the country or the government should not legally allow queer marriage. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's a really popular sort of argument. And it was interesting that he mentioned that he was at Summit Ministries. I've had a little bit of experience with them. They're one of the big, train your kids in apologetics before they go to college groups. And it's very of a piece with, I don't really know if you remember back when everybody was really worried about postmodernism. And one of the things they would have is they would train youth groups to go through and say, well, do you believe in absolute truth? And if you said no, then you're supposed to do absolutely not believe in it. And it was really more of a gotcha than a real philosophical inquiry into sort of epistemological questions. And I feel like there's a lot of the same thing going on here with the question of tolerance. What's called the paradox of tolerance is a really recognized phenomena, right? That in the marketplace of ideas, you can tolerate all ideas except for the one that says stop tolerating ideas because it's self-defeating, right? Like, because that was consume itself, right? So the position, queer people shouldn't be represented. Basically, if you're saying I am being intolerant, that is one of the things that a tolerant society has to say, well, we have some problems with that. At the minimum, that needs to be regulated. So I think he's taking a complex and recognizably nuanced issue, and he's reducing it down to these sort of, frankly, the talking points that we used to teach evangelical youth group kids. In terms of how to do a gotcha with a philosopher, with a professor in a class your freshman year.
No, I tend to agree. It's almost like when I grew up around apologetics my whole life, when they would say, well, truth by definition is exclusive, right? Or love by definition has boundaries, so to speak. You can say tolerance also has boundaries. And so we say this for our community all the time, that in our Facebook community that's private, we accept people who have different opinions. But we do make it clear that we do prioritize certain perspectives over others. But if that person can tolerate that different perspective and make room for it, they're welcome there, right? What Frank is doing is saying, my tolerance says you cannot be who you are. You don't have the same rights I do. And then when we say, well, you can't believe that, they go, oh, you're not tolerant of my intolerance. It's like, yeah, that would be correct. That would be right. Just like how we wouldn't tolerate someone who was a staunch segregationist anymore, right? We wouldn't say, if that person used the same rhetoric, well, you're intolerant of my segregation. We go, yes, we are intolerant of your segregation. That argument would not fly in almost any other circumstance that we look back in history and say, what were they thinking? But now because we're here, it's an easy, almost kind of gotcha question.
Yeah, I think so.
Claiming to be inclusive, tolerant, and diverse, they're not it at all. Inclusion, tolerance, and diversity to corporate elites means if you don't see it our way, we're going to hurt you.
Okay,
so
sorry, I gotta stop here. Corporate elites is such a, for me, dog whistle. It just screams that far right language. And of course, we all know that corporate elites is only code for people who they don't like, that they think are censoring them. That's why Elon Musk is like the darling corporate elite of right-wing everything right now because of what he's done to Twitter. So I just had to point that out. Like, come on. I mean, the language that Frank is using more and more seems way more about right-wing talking points than about actual, maybe faithful apologetic work.
Yeah, there's going to be a point in a few minutes where I think Melissa's going to say, like, hey, we're if you're here and you're gay and you're watching this, we love you. And it's an interesting comment, and I'm sure we'll have thoughts about it when we get there. But it's worth noting, I think, here that, like, the way they're talking about us and us being queer people right now to one another. They're not talking to queer people in this video.
Right. Yes. Good point.
Column called The Cisco Kid. And then I wrote a column that it was on townhall.com and maybe a few other places called Sex at Work. By the way, do not Google sex at work. Don't Google that. If you Google that, it'll take you right to Harvey Weinstein's website. Okay, now, go to crossexamine.org and go to our little search bar there and type in sex at work. You'll see the article. And basically what I do in there, Melissa, is I ask the question, why is corporate America talking about sex at work? Are we supposed to have sex at work? I mean, what's the point here? As long as we treat everyone with respect, regardless of whether or not we agree on sexual issues, we ought to be able to work together. And so I said, I pledge to people who might not agree with me on certain religious and moral issues, I pledge that I'm going to treat them with respect because they're made in the image of God. We don't have to agree on everything to work together. When you really think about this, why is corporate America so obsessed with this? It really does.
Yes, Billy, you have thoughts.
I was just going to say, like, Frank is, okay, this goes back to they're talking about us, they're not talking to us.
Yeah.
That kind of language, I can treat everyone with respect, even without disagreeing with them. In principle, I'm sure that's true, right? I'm not sure, absolutely, right? At the same time, if you tell me that, if you communicate to me that my marriage is invalid, that certainly is not something I will experience as respectful. I don't know of a respectful way to tell me that my marriage isn't real, right?
Right.
And this is, and he has said he said some pretty inflammatory stuff in that book. So again, he's still referencing this book he got in trouble for that he's sort of selling here. And the stuff he said in there, by almost nobody's definition, would qualify as respectful. And remember, he's coming in as a contractor. He didn't publish this book. He wasn't spreading the papers at work. He wasn't being an employee. He was just like, but these are the views he's bringing as a contractor teaching about leadership.
Right. Yeah. And also think about now the people that he partners with. Again, I was at the Pastor Summit. We did a whole video on this. It's on our YouTube a few videos back. And the language that they used was not respectful. It was mocking. We're going to play a montage in a little bit, kind of demonstrating this really weird dichotomy and almost contradiction between, no, we love queer people. We love them. And then seeing what the people who they support actually say publicly. It's shocking once you compare the two. And so I tend to agree with you. It's like if you're advocating for someone's existence not to be valid, you can say that you love them all you want, but your actions say actually you're less than, right? And I bring up the segregation of the 60s and 50s because it's an easy stark contrast of these were the same arguments back then. No, we love black people. They just have to stay in their own space. They can't be at our colleges, but we love them. It's like, wait, that would never fly with that line of thinking. Why is that flying now when it comes to the queer community?
Right.
Anything to do with workplace productivity, do we all have to agree that certain sexual practices are good or bad in order to make widgets or to conduct some sort of service for people? No, we don't. Mm-hmm. In any event, after that happened, I couldn't work in corporate America anymore because I was out. I was out as a Christian. I was out as somebody who didn't believe in same-sex marriage. So Bank of America fired me right after that. And
not just out, fighting against.
Then I went full-time with Cross-Examine. This is I was 49 years old. And that was in 2011. So since then, I've been doing Cross-Examine full-time. And then in 2016, after the Supreme Court imposed same-sex marriage on the entire nation, actually they did it in 2015 and 2016, I updated the book. Mm-hmm. And then in just this year, I updated it again because of transgenderism. So now this is the new third edition. Mm-hmm. And we're dealing with all these issues without quoting Bible verses, as I mentioned. And I left the first and second sections just as they are because I think the arguments are still good. And much of what I said there, unfortunately, has come true.
Yeah.
With regard to what I said would happen if same-sex marriage is imposed on the nation.
Oh, boy.
Yes. And this is what I found particularly interesting is okay, so my best friend, she brought this up a long time ago, and I never thought about it this way. But there was an issue at that time where people are Christians, not even Christians, just conservatives, were concerned from a societal level. And they're like, this is a slippery slope, guys. This is something that's going to evolve into something that is not good for our nation. And everybody's like, yeah, you're being paranoid. You're being fanatical. Mm-hmm. And the thing with a slippery slope is sometimes you don't know if that's the case until time has gone by to see if that's the case, if that's what happened. And it seems to be, wow, that was a really big turning point, same-sex marriage, into the evolution of where we got to where we are today with a lot of the transgender craze, gender spectrums, everything.
Okay. I hear it. I know we got to stop. We got to pause. I hate to cut her off mid-thought. Can I just say one thing, then I'll hand it over to you, Billy? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So what's interesting to me about this slippery slope, which, by the way, I mean, yes, a slippery slope can definitely exist in life. One example might be looking at how Republicans treated Bill Clinton and then how they made exceptions for Donald Trump that led to an insurrection. And now all of a sudden we have people like Frank Turek hanging out with Charlie Kirk, who's platforming Alex Jones. That's quite the slippery slope. I just think it is so fascinating that, and I mean this with the utmost respect for Melissa, because I've talked to her and I genuinely think is a good faith actor. She wants to understand. She wants to learn. She wants to understand different perspectives. So I appreciate that. And in my conversation with her, I did say, I understand that you're concerned about progressive Christianity, but are you not concerned about how far right your own circle has gotten, the level of rhetoric, still many of them believing that the election was stolen, even though it wasn't. At the time of this recording, Donald Trump is polling 54% to become the party's nominee after being indicted. Again, these are all historical first. I think you can so easily point out the slippery slope that they have been on that has been harming people for a long time. And instead we get, well, because of same-sex marriage, now we have this, quote, transgender craze, which we both know is not accurate. But I just had to throw that out there. Like it blows my mind that they can't see how far they've come in a decade or two.
Yeah, can I give a short history of kind of what's going on there? Because I think
Hell
I'm
yeah.
going to try to assume that there is a good faith impression that's being presented in that video.
Yeah.
And I want to speak from that perspective.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say I can understand why somebody who hasn't been paying a lot of attention but is aware of what's going on culturally
Yeah.
might think, well, they didn't say anything about the transgenders, and we even said this will lead to like gender anarchy back when we were arguing about same-sex marriage, but then it happened, and the next thing you know, boom, transgender people, and that's what we're having to fight about now.
Right.
At a sort of surface level, I can see where that might be compelling to somebody who's sort of, they're straight, they're cis, they're living their life, and that's kind of the way they feel like the national conversation has evolved. The fact of the matter is that trans people and cis, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pan people have been working together in these loose coalitions ever since even before the Stonewall riots, sort of the beginning of the LGBT rights movement. And that over the time, there have been a lot of negotiations around which issues are going to be prioritized, whether or not marriage is even a thing we were going to fight for. This was a huge debate. And there were times when, I will say, frankly, the trans community was really hurt when the broader gay community would choose to just downplay our concerns and our issues in the interest of achieving certain milestones. They thought, well, if we can get this if we drop the trans issues from our platform for a little while. And they would do that on and off. And then they would bring us back and they would apologize. And it's been a bit of a thing. So it is absolutely true that the entire LGBT community as a whole, as a general, taken as a whole, was focused heavily on marriage in that time period, sort of 2008 to 2016 or so. And it's also true that what they were telling the trans people that whole time was, you're next. We don't think we can get your issues taken care of, focused on at this time, but we will get there eventually. So this is what was happening. I don't want to say behind the scenes. This was happening very openly in queer spaces, but it's not the kind of thing that Christians will have seen. And so it's not that hard after the fact to go back and say, oh, they never talked about this, but the slippery slope, and then this is the next step. No, this has been part of, we have been talking about all our rights for all of us, and there have been tactical decisions made along the way as to what would work. They're not tactical decisions that I love, right? Again, speaking as a trans woman, I really do wish that our issues had been foregrounded earlier.
Right.
I have concerns with the Human Rights Coalition. I campaign. They're great, but some concerns. And so I think what's happening is we're seeing just a historically complicated activist history reduced to fit a certain narrative. And that isn't to say I don't think that narrative is compelling. Again, at a sort of surface level, I want to say I can see how that might be compelling to someone. And I want to clarify, that's the history, and that's a lot of why this is not in fact what was going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. But to be clear, trans people have always existed, right? Like the way that folks like Melissa and I think in the world that she's a part of behave, or what they say is almost like it's like popcorn. Like one day the kernels were there, then all of a sudden here they are. Oh my God, where do they come from? It's like, well, they've always been there. You might not have noticed them because right-wing media was too focused on stopping the gays and not the trans people. And now that that's been, one as of now, hopefully it stays that way. Now the next target is, the next group of people, right? So that's an important, I think, piece of that conversation as well to recognize.
Cool. Yeah, I absolutely recommend everybody look up people like Albert Cashier. Look up. There's some really cool trans people from way back in history, and of course, Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera were at the center of Stonewall. We've always been around.
Yeah. And interesting to pinpoint it to that. Now you talk about same-sex marriage, and again, not from a biblical perspective, which some people might kind of what, Frank? What, Melissa? How could you do that? But I'm here to say that's actually really brilliant, because if you're somebody that doesn't believe in God or the Bible, there are still statistics and facts, really good reasons why this view is, held. And I'm wondering if you could do that. So if you can give some helpful statistics and facts for why anybody would have an issue with same-sex marriage at all, because most people would look at you and I and think, wow, you're just being hateful, you're being mean, you're being harmful to this group of people. When really, you're looking at this from a very different and very interesting societal perspective, which actually a lot of psychologists and sociologists quietly agree with.
Yeah, maybe before we get there, let's just point this out. The culture thinks that love requires approval, when in reality, if you think about it, love does not require approval. I ask parents, or kids actually, if your parents approve of everything you wanted to do or approved of everything you wanted to do when you were 13, would they have been loving parents? Of course, people go, no, my parents, if they approved of everything I did, they wouldn't be loving, they'd be unloving. They'd be enabling me to destroy myself and others. Mm-hmm. And because love does not require approval, love requires that you stand in the way of evil that people want to do. You know, in the past.
Yeah.
Yes, Billy, you raised your hand.
So this is one of those, I've been thinking about this a lot, right? I mean, if you can't be queer and Christian and not have run into, hey, I can love you without loving your sin. Right.
Right.
And there is one of the frustrating things that I find is that once that's said, that almost kills conversations anymore. Because from my perspective, like, I am fully convinced that biblically, before God, my queerness is not sinful, right? So when you tell me that, what you're saying is, I can love you while calling an essential part of who you are sinful. Right. And I'm not even sure that's true. I'm not sure that you can love me if you don't love who I am. Right. Like, this is who I am. This is one of the reasons that we did the Born This Way thing was such a big part of the queer platform back in the day, right? This is because this is just who we are. And to say, I love you, but I don't love part of who you are,
right,
does not make a lot of sense. On the other hand, saying, I love you, but I don't love something sinful about you, I mean, I can say as a Christian, that does actually make sense, right? If I have somebody who does do sinful things, I don't love that they do sinful things. Right. Right? I don't love selfishness.
Right.
Right. So what happens is when you do this, you end up, it's a message that only ends up dividing, because everybody who already agrees with you about saying, about queerness will agree with you if you say, I can love people without loving what they, loving their homosexuality or whatever.
Right. Right.
But everybody who doesn't agree with you about the sinfulness of it, it just sounds like it's nonsense. It sounds like you're saying a completely contradictory thing. So all you're really doing when you make these statements anymore is you're sort of speaking to a base and alienating everybody else. It's not again, they're not talking with us, they're talking about us.
Right. And also, I mean, I don't know why people in this space cannot understand how people could be born to like who they like, because they're born to like who they like. I can't control why I found my partner attractive I don't know why. I don't know why as a teenager I tend to be more attracted to the woman with blonde hair over brown, and now I'm married to someone with brown hair over blonde, and I love it. We have a great marriage, right? I can't tell you, I didn't wake up and choose that one day. It just made sense, so I went with it, So I don't know why for people who are heterosexual, this is such a stretch to imagine this is just who Billy is. This is who so-and-so is. I mean, it makes complete sense because I've experienced that. Only I tend to be attracted to, people of the opposite sex.
If I can make a suggestion, I honestly, and I hope this isn't too cynical, I really do think a lot of it's about power. I think it's subconscious. I'm not saying that people are trying to hold on to power. Yeah. But if you recognize that being straight is just a thing people are, and that being queer is another thing people are, then what that does is it takes away the power of straight. It takes away the privileged position of being the default, of not having to look at what you are and imagine who you are, right? And imagine yourself as contextualized as just one option of many ways of being human. Yeah. And I think that's really scary to look at. I think that's a really hard thing for people who want to recognize.
Yeah. Good point.
Melissa, that everyone reads at their wedding, but nobody obeys. 1 Corinthians 13. Yeah. Paul says, love always protects. Yeah. He says, love does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but love rejoices in the truth. Love always perseveres, right? Mm-hmm. So in order to love people, you need to protect them, which means you have to stand in the way of the evil that they want to do. And so I think we need to say that from the outset, the motivation we ought to have is to love people, but love doesn't mean you approve of everything they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got to say, I just really hate this language of evil in this context, right? Just someone being queer is evil, or them being in a committed relationship or whatever it might be, of consenting adults is somehow inherently evil. It just feels a little yucky to me. I'm not going to lie. I'm like, why are we calling this evil? I don't get it.
And I think there's an equivocation that happens, and Celeste called this out really nicely in the comments earlier, where they go back and forth between talking about things like who you are, and then or your relationships, your romantic relationships, who your partner is, to then talking about sex. And they want it to be about sex when it's useful to be about sex, and then it's not about sex when it's not useful to be about sex, right? So straight people get married, and it's a relationship, it's beautiful, it's love, it's romance. right? Queer people get married, and it's entirely about the kind of sex they have.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
which I think has explained some of the, like, there's some frustration earlier on about, so the way Frank was saying, why is this all about sex? Well, we only talked about relationships. The queer people advocating for our marriages at work only talked about our relationships. Nobody walked nobody walked into the office and announced the kind of sex they like to have. That would get you a trip to HR. But they read our comments about our relationships as being about sex, while their comments about their relationships are just default neutral. They're about beautiful relationships.
Yeah.
And then they are, but we should get that same honor.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of this. When I first wrote this book back in 2008, I got an email from an FBI agent. The guy was undercover with NAMBLA.
Oh.
You know what NAMBLA is? The
No.
North American Man-Boy Love Association. These are the pedophiles.
Oh,
Wow.
boy. Okay, hold on. I gotta
and,
stop. I gotta just stop, Frank, right here. And Billy, I will definitely give you the mic. I know you have a lot to say about this, but just because for research, I was like, you know what? I'm going through this. Let me make sure I have all my ducks in a row. So I Googled NAMBLA, and I found their website, which looks like it's about, I don't know, 25 years old, written in like HTML1. They were founded in 1975, just to be clear. Okay, so it's not like this is some new organization that since this, again, quote unquote, trans craze, as they call it, took off, now NAMBLA exists. However, I would say the overwhelming majority of people, queer or not, have never seen NAMBLA as a respectable organization. Like, what are we talking about here? In fact, when I Googled them, all I found were articles from progressive media, from centric media saying, hey, NAMBLA has been disintegrated in the past 6 years. Hey, this is horrible. The government has them on their website saying this is a terrible organization. I don't know anyone, and if I did, I would say, that's a problem. We got to talk about it because you're way wrong about this, to be clear. But like to pretend that this is somehow like the next logical conclusion, it's ridiculous when you think about it, because we would never apply the same standard to a heterosexual person, right? No one would think, oh, well, you're married to a woman, Tim? The next step, it's NAMBLA. It's like, what? Like, no, it's not. I'm very happy in my relationship.
Oh, yeah, gosh, no, right. I mean, and here's the thing, like NAMBLA, I only know who they are because of the debates about gay marriage back in the like late early 2007, 2008, 2009.
Yes.
And conservatives were bringing them up then. I think part of that really honestly might be that Frank hasn't updated that part of his book, and he's releasing a third edition. He's just reusing the stuff that we don't even talk about anymore. But yeah, for all of that, it's ridiculous. That was never part of the queer advocacy. That's not what we've been fighting for, and every queer organization I know has denounced them. Like it's I think maybe, okay, I'm doing the thing, right? I'm going to be really charitable here.
Right.
If this is what he thinks, I will grant that when a bad organization uses the talking points from a good organization, it is the responsibility of the good organization to say, no, we denounce that. And he's right that like the NAMBLA type people do try to use our talking points. It is also true that every single major LGBTQ plus advocacy organization has said, no, oh my gosh, we denounce that. It's wrong, and our ethic insists on consent. You can't have a sexual ethic apart from consent.
Exactly.
And pedophilia fundamentally makes consent impossible. We denounce it. So it has been said so many times.
Right, I agree. Now, my uncharitable take is maybe they should read their Bible if they want to talk about like some weird sexual relationships that don't seem like they're that frowned upon. We'll just keep it there because I don't want to get censored by YouTube because, the man's watching. But my point is just that I agree with you, Billy, 100%. I have never to this day seen anyone try and push legislation to legalize what Frank is assuming is like we're like one step away from happening. And there would be if such a piece of legislation was suggested, there would be such widespread, rightfully so, outrage and say, are you crazy? Of course not. So anyway, I was trying to be very emphatic about that this is, I think, a straw man, because there's just no data that suggests this is like the next logical step, because consent between two adults is usually like the foundational bedrock of any kind of sexual ethic that we would be advocating for.
Absolutely.
Oh, why do I do this to myself? I'm triggered all day.
In a book, I can't remember the name of the book, but he said I have your book, Correct Not Politically Correct, and you deal with the objection, we were born this way, because that was the justification for saying, well, that's why we should engage in this behavior. And he said to me, do you know what the pedophiles are using as their justification for what they do? We were born this way. We just have this affinity for children and we can't help it. Now, of course, in the book, I point out there's a difference between attractions and actions.
Yes.
We all have attractions we ought not act on.
Let me just pause and just say something in case the audience is thinking about it. People could use that born this way language to commit a lot of harm all the time. I have people in my life who are like, hey, for some reason, I was just born with the proclivity towards more addictive behaviors, right? Whether it's alcohol abuse, substance abuse, right? Obviously, if you're committing harm, the rhetoric of I'm born this way does not work. I mean, that's like a pretty widely understood thing, right? If I get angry a lot and I abuse my spouse, no one, again, queer or not, this is just human, would be like, well, Tim was born that way, so of course it's okay. No, of course not. So we're not using that language. We're using it in the context of who someone is, again, adult, attracted to, or how just someone is wired to behave that can become healthy, ethical ways of existing in the world. That's very important to navigate because Frank tends to just throw a lot of things out and make a lot of you use the word equivalencies or something like that, just trying to make it like a 1-for-1. And it's not the same thing. And it's not fair because it's not good faith.
Yeah.
All right. We'll keep going.
And I know that if everyone watching knows that if you continue, or let me put it this way, if you, without moral restraint, act on every attraction you have, you wouldn't live very long. You certainly wouldn't have stable relationships very long because you have attractions all the time that you need to say no to.
Yeah.
Particularly as you and I are both married, not to one another, but we're married, right? We have to say no to anybody else that we find attractive. Otherwise,
that goes for queer relationships, right? I mean, Billy, you're a married person, am I right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I don't understand. Right, Frank, if you're committed to one person and anyone, straight or not, would be tempted to go outside of that, we would say, yeah, you're breaking consent. You're breaking the approval of that person, right? I don't know why this is like the slam dunk moment of, therefore, being queer is unnatural, because that's the whole argument, right? It's natural law. I'm failing to see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
At this point, I think he likes to say a lot of things that pretty much anybody would agree with, and then do this sort of shift. But the queers are not doing that, right?
Right. Exactly.
It's just going to be destroyed. I mean, that's just a simple example. You see things you're attracted to all the time, whether it's from a financial perspective. I wish I could buy that. Yeah, I'm going to go into debt if I do. Or I wish I could eat that. Yeah, I'm going to become 600 pounds if I keep doing that.
I'm so sorry, Billy. I have to cut off right there. Just to be clear, this is a big gap here, I think, in Frank's logic. You can go into debt legally. You can eat that piece of cake legally, right? No one is advocating for the government to restrain if people, again, we're presuming Frank's worldview for a second. Obviously, we disagree with it. But let's presume that he's equating, eating McDonald's every day to being in a queer relationship. Okay, but the government doesn't prohibit people from eating McDonald's all day. So why are you advocating for it? Does that make sense? Like it doesn't even make sense that way.
And I think he really likes to. I think he tends to jump around a lot in terms of how much he wants to be arguing for. Sometimes he is saying, same-sex marriage absolutely shouldn't be legal. Other times he's saying, well, there should be some toleration. I think how far he's trying to push in a given argument depends for him entirely on the argument. And this goes back to a lot of the sort of tactical approach to doing apologetics that, again, feels very familiar to a kid that grew up in a 90s youth group.
Yeah, I agree.
Most of the time you have to say no. And unfortunately, the culture, at least in some areas, seems to think that, no, you have to act on your attractions. No, you don't. You have to act on what is moral and right. Otherwise, you're going to destroy yourself and others. And if you look at same-sex behavior, just medically, no one likes to talk about this, but I talk about it in the book, and I have footnotes throughout it. Same-sex behavior from a medical perspective is not healthy. In fact, and stats change because our medical care has improved, but for, say, gay men, their lifespan is anywhere between 8 and 20 years less than heterosexuals.
All right.
Yeah.
We prepped for this. Okay. Billy, the floor is yours. I will try and be your slide maestro on my end, and we'll try and get to this. So the claim that Frank is making is, hey, from a natural law perspective, gay men live 8 to 20 years less than straight men do. Therefore, it is unhealthy to be gay. Go ahead.
Okay. This one was honestly really hard for me. In fact, I think emotionally, this was possibly the hardest claim to research, try to engage with. It's certainly the hardest. And he's about to, I'm not a gay man. He's about to come after transgender people. But this might honestly be the most emotionally difficult thing he says for me to just process, because he's weaponizing the AIDS crisis. He is weaponizing a plague that destroyed my community as a talking point against the legitimacy and validity of queer people, right? So the numbers he's getting there, and I did actually go and get I looked at his book, because in this video he keeps saying what the statistics say, but he doesn't cite them in the video, and they're not in the comments, they're not anywhere in the information. So I was having trouble finding it, so I went and got to find the book to find out what is he actually citing on this one, and he's citing. Well, he's citing some pretty ancient stuff. This is, I think, a 2007 study that I think is the major one that he wanted to cite on this one.
Did you give me a slide for this or no?
I don't think we have a slide on that.
Okay, that's fine.
Oh, we do have. We have a. I think we do have a slide that's like a screenshot of his book and the footnote to it.
Oh, okay. I'll find that and pull it up.
Yeah. So his citation for this is a couple of really old studies on the lifespan of queer people. Most of them are just on the lifespan of gay men. He kind of admits that there is, in a footnote, right? They love to put the caveats in the footnote. Yeah. But he in the footnote, he admits that there's some problems with most of the studies, but he wants to hold on to a gold standard one that is not done by a Christian organization, basically. And the problem is entirely that it determines the average lifespan of gay men based on the 70s, 80s, and 90s during the AIDS crisis. Which is, of course, going to bias your life expectancy downwards significantly. But I want to say that a lot of the reason that lifespan of gay men is lower in that time period is because conservatives were so repulsed by queer people that they did not fund the research to treat the disease that was ravaging our community. This was not a factor of some intrinsic sinfulness of anybody, except people who didn't think that queer people deserve decent hospitalization and research into what actually might heal us and protect us and keep us safe.
Yes.
Because they didn't, the disease has spread. It spread much farther than it ever would have, because the government took as long as they did that, because the Reagan administration wouldn't recognize AIDS for as long as it did HIV/AIDS. So he's using this tragedy, and it's just so painful to see somebody use what is, I think, in our generations, the last few, the great tragedy of our community, and then try to use that against us is, again, I don't have another word but cruel.
Yeah.
It is cruel.
It's dehumanizing. It's dehumanizing. And you're absolutely right. In fact, in Bridget Eileen Rivera's book, Heavy Burdens, she has a whole chapter devoted with actual stories, actual examples. And honestly, it was heartbreaking. Also, I did not know this, but you're absolutely correct. During the AIDS crisis, the government failed to respond. Christians were incredibly cruel. They saw it as, quote, God's judgment, right, towards those people. And by the way, if you think I'm exaggerating, remember, Jerry Falwell, Sr., after 9/11, blamed 9/11 as God's judgment for the feminists, the abortionists, and the gays. So this is a very entrenched belief system. And you're right, help and funding was withheld, and a lot of people who do not need to suffer and die suffered and died. And I completely agree. It's a complete dehumanization and a weaponization, by the way, because you'll notice here, friends, this is very important that I want to bring up. And again, I'm not saying that Frank or Melissa wouldn't be able to do this, but for some reason, they really don't cite their sources here. And this is kind of this is why I wanted to bring Billy on, because I said, Billy, can you be more of the research side? So we could give you sources. We have a lot of other slides we'll get to showing actual data points that we can pull from. If people want to dispute that, they can, but we at least have a source we're giving you why we believe what we believe from. You don't really get that in a lot of these types of podcasts. You get people who just spew a fire hose of information. Oh, this, that, the other thing. And how do you verify all of that? Well, you take your time going through it line by line like this and kind of debunking it. So, yeah, I agree. Yep. All right, let's keep going.
Medically, and not to go into the details here, but medically, as we know, it and anatomically it doesn't work. It's an abuse of the human body. People never say this; they don't want to say it, but look, it's just the truth. Okay, and so if you get the book,
I need to say it. Obviously, we know what Frank's referring to. Okay, and many heterosexuals engage in the same behavior. Okay, I'm just pointing that out. In fact, Mark Driscoll in his sex book, like ages ago, talks about anal sex and is like, hey, if you guys want to do it, go for it. So I really think this is such a poorly laid out argument that if you're having anal sex, you're gonna live 8 to 20 years less. If that was the case, you wouldn't. That'd be a problem for women and men who are heterosexual as well. Clearly. Anyway,
and
just
again,
wanted to point
notice
that
that,
out.
like where he is right now, gay relationships are just sex right now.
Great point. That's a great point.
Not politically correct, I get into all that. And you can take it or leave it, but it's the truth. You don't like it, I'm sorry, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, and then you talk about orientation and behavior, and there's a difference between them. Where it's not necessarily, the issue isn't the orientation, it's the sexual behavior.
Right. This is progression.
And
this is progression.
I think you do a good job.
This is an evangelical progression from where they were in the 80s, in the 90s, in the 2000s, right? So again, this demonstrates to me that once again, in particular, white evangelicals like these folks and others, they'll eventually catch up, but they will go kicking and screaming with a lot of freaking harm. That's the problem, right? That's the problem. Because you ask Jerry Falwell when he was alive, oh no, even the orientation is I'm going to use some strong language, an abomination, right? Because if you're just gay, you're just evil. Now it's, well, the orientation isn't bad. It's only if you act on it. So we can even trace the progression in evangelical thought one step painfully at a time.
Parsing that out. So for people that kind of want to know more about that.
Let me say one other thing, because
Sure.
the genesis of this book really came out of a friend of mine who died in 1993 of AIDS.
This is horrible. I hate this.
I start the book out with that. And his parents, who were the kid grew up right next to me. His younger brother was my best friend. He was just a little bit older than me. And his parents were like second parents to me. But when this friend of mine came out back in the late 80s, his parents didn't really know what to do. And instead of kind of warning him that this is not the road to go down, they embraced his lifestyle and tried to affirm everything he was doing. And 6 years later, he was dead.
What's frustrating about this story to me, first off, it is tragic. Of course, we all know that. It's a horrible story. It's a sad story. It bothers me that Frank either is ignorant of his own tradition's complicity, right, in withholding funding that might have helped his friend, or he just overlooks that and instead the focus is, well, the quote lifestyle is what did it, right? And it's like, wow, we know now the history of that situation, and we know that many Christians, like as we just said, including someone put this in the comments. I'm gonna pull up. It's a little shocking, but Lawrence said, I remember the mocking by nurses who I worked with during the AIDS crisis. Yeah. That's a real thing. And again, Bridget Eileen Rivera details that in the book. So this culture of dehumanization aided in what happened to Frank's friend. But for Frank, he's now become, in my opinion, I want to be very careful because that's Frank's friend. I don't want to take away from his own pain and feeling that. But I think it's a little harmful, maybe, or hurtful that Frank is now using his friend's story for a political talking point to further dehumanize queer people. Yeah. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And I mean, and again, he certainly, I think in about 10 seconds, he's about to be a little bit choked up. You can kind of see it about the death of his friend or his friend's older brother.
Right.
And he's about to say, I don't want to victim blame. He's about to victim blame. He is going to blame the parents for affirming their child.
Here we go.
Now, look, I'm not trying to cast blame on them for that. I'm just pointing out that it probably wasn't the best approach in hindsight to say, yeah, you should do this because you have this attraction. It's medically not a road you want to go down.
Yeah, and I think that's where that kind of gets lost on people, because that's why, a conversation like this would be considered hateful for people, in this demographic, but we don't hate you. Like if you're watching this, and thank you for watching, you may not agree with us or even like us, but there's a love and a concern that, as you said, a lot of people don't talk about. that is this good for society as a whole? Is this good for you? Is this good for, and I think that that's where Carl Trueman talks about this, where the individual self, the authentic self within is what's taking dominance instead of what's good for everybody, like an unselfish type of wholeness.
I want to bring something up here, just to quote Frank's own use of 1 Corinthians 13, right? I mean, it's pretty clear that in the love chapter, right, it does not dishonor others. It's not proud. It's not self-seeking. It always trusts. It always hopes. Hopefully this screen works. Let's see. Hey, it does. There we go. I mean, we have it right here. So where's the trust in that conversation from Melissa? Where's the hope? Where's the persevering? Where is the truth? Meaning, why aren't they addressing or talking to or with people who are in the queer community trying to learn, but instead talking at, right? So from my vantage point, this is like a weaponized version of love where it's, hey, you have to assimilate into what I am telling you love is. And if you don't believe me, or if you give me a different option, I'm going to reject that and say, sorry, you just don't understand the true meaning of love, right? And so where does that lead us? Well, it leads to people... It leads to the AIDS crisis, right? It leads to people dehumanizing other people in the name of love. And it's very upside down, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, like the second one there is love is kind. There's nothing kind. And she can say, I'm sorry, we don't hate you if this is harsh. We love you. Love is patient. Love is kind. Yeah. There is nothing of kindness in telling the parents of an AIDS victim that their affirmation of his queerness caused his death. There is in no world is that a kind thing to do. It just isn't.
Yeah.
And I don't think we need to pretend it is. I don't think we should have to pretend it is.
I agree.
It's tough for people to see past that. And from what
yeah, it is. And when you look at from a political perspective, there's only three things a government can do on any issue. A government can prohibit a behavior, permit a behavior, or promote a behavior. Those are the only three things you can do. You can prohibit, permit, or promote. Now, for many years in most of our nation's history, the nation through the states thought it was acceptable to prohibit same-sex behavior. And we might today say, well, it's a free country. We should allow people. We should permit people to do that. Okay, so now you're moving from prohibit to permit. But to go to same-sex marriage, what you've done now is you've gone to promote. Now you're saying that the behavior is a good thing. And by the way, even as late as 1986, the Supreme Court said that the states had the right to prohibit same-sex behavior. It wasn't until 2003 in the Lawrence v. Texas decision that the Supreme Court said, you can't prohibit it anymore. Now, the Constitution...
I kind of debate this language of prohibit, permit, promote.
Yeah.
I don't think saying, hey, queer people have the right to get married and be federally recognized as a married couple is somehow promoting. It is simply saying we're gonna give you the same access to rights legally that other people have in society, right? What we're not gonna do is say, hey, if you get married to someone of the same gender, we're going to give you $1 million. That would be promoting. That's like an incentive, but simply allowing or saying we will expand equal rights under the law to other types of marriages that are not just heterosexual is, I would argue, in this framework is permitting, not promoting. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Billy.
No, I mean, pretty much the same thing. I don't get where the idea of, if I'm cynical, promoting is exactly the language that a right-wing base, and especially a lot of anti-trans Christian nationalist types love, right? Like they love this language that we are promoting this thing, because then they can say, well, we're just against promotion of it in schools or in libraries or whatever, right?
Right.
There's just no there. There's no actual promotion to point to. Nobody is going up to a kid and saying, to a straight kid and saying, hey, have you considered getting gay married? It might be great. Right? Like, that's just not happening.
Right. Right. And maybe just to paint this... Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, maybe to kind of draw another stark contrast, if you see an interracial couple on TV, no one's like, oh my God, I'm being I imagine if this was then, right? Imagine this is a segregationist saying, well, the government's promoting interracial marriage because they exist on TV. It's like, first off, they should be allowed to, but number two, like, that's not how this works. Like, we're just recognizing that people exist and have the same rights underneath the law. So for me, it's just this comparison just falls apart just so quickly when you really start thinking about it. So anyway, I digress. I will keep moving on.
It didn't change. right? It was just the Supreme Court had changed and went more political. Now you can argue the political, should it be prohibited or not? Let's just
That's
say
what Frank is arguing.
Okay, it should be permitted. But to go from permit to promote, now you're doing something else. You're saying this is a good thing. And you know what the real problem with same-sex marriage is, from my view anyway, and as I explain this in the book, correct?
Yes, Frank.
It's not that same-sex marriage is the issue. It's that marriage now as an institution has become genderless. And if it's become genderless, what that means is that marriage no longer has any connection to children. Because if two men can get married or two women can get married, that's not a procreative relationship. And you're teaching, the law is a great teacher, you're teaching society that marriage is just about coupling. It's not about children. Well, if there is not...
Do you want to take us... I didn't understand his comment about marriage becoming genderless. And you want to take a stab at that? I did not follow.
So again, maybe breaking our rule about cynicism here. I did cynically think he's just trying to bridge the gap to transness. He's trying to draw some kind of straight path establishment, because the closest I could get after that was he's trying to say that if gay people can get married, then the gender of your spouse isn't legally pre-required, and therefore you don't need two genders in a marriage. But that's not genderless. That's the closest I could get, and it's still not genderless. Like, I'm a lesbian. It matters to me that my wife is a woman, right? Like,
right.
I don't know what he's.
Okay.
I don't know what he's saying.
All right. Same.
If marriage is not the institution to protect children, what institution does protect children? Now, of course, we know that there are some opposite sex marriages that don't produce children, but those are the exception rather than the rule. And secondly, they still exhibit to society a generally procreative relationship. And thirdly, that marriage keeps the man off the street from impregnating women who are not his wife.
Okay.
So
do you have
anything
to say? And
you go first, Billy. You go.
Say a thing real quick.
You go.
He just threw you under the bus, my guy.
What the hell, Frank? Oh my God! Like what? Like the only reason why I'm married is so I'm not impregnating women down the street. Like, I don't. Okay. Well, also, again, I don't. The government in America gives me a tax break because having children costs me a lot of money. They do not pay me to have children. They are not promoting me to have children by saying, hey, if you have kids, we'll give you a free house, we'll give you a free car. No, they say, okay, Tim, we understand that having children will cost you money, so we'll give you a break on your taxes. So even this idea of like the government is in the business of promoting childbearing. Actually, I mean, our healthcare system is pretty screwed up. We're still paying off my firstborn's medical bills. So if anything, society as it currently stands is aimed at keeping me away from getting my wife pregnant again. Because why would we do that when we have to pay more medical bills? There's no family leave. There's no affordable childcare. Rates are through the roof. Oh, thank God I get a tax break. Like even that, just look around, Frank. There's nothing that is bent. And might I argue, then I'll give it to you, Billy. It is, and I don't know Frank's or Melissa's policies on this. I would just say, because Frank does work with Turning Point USA, Turning Point, they don't advocate for livable wages. They call that socialism. They don't advocate for paid family leave. They call that Marxism, right? So like these pro-family policies that you think would be the loudest calls from the pro-family people, it's actually the opposite. We still can't get affordable health care, and they still decry Obamacare, which is very flawed, but at least Obama tried to get us something. So it just is so interesting to see the words out of their mouth and to see the policies that they push for. They are in complete odds with each other.
Yeah, no, I mean, these are the people that tried to that did successfully block the expanded child tax credit that like actually made it a lot more affordable to have kids, right? Like this is the one government thing we've seen in quite a while that made like literally having more children, you got paid. Like you got some money for it, and they got rid of that. So I'm with you. I think, and again, I spent a lot of time trying to think about this one.
Yeah.
I think this really does go back to he's trying to do what he's calling a natural law thing. And this and the natural law justification of marriage is procreation, or like the justification of sex, honestly,
Right.
procreation. And so I think my suspicion is, and again, I don't have confirmation of this. I haven't talked to Frank on it, right? Like,
Right.
my suspicion is that his project is to do this not using Bible verses, defense of straight marriage, and getting rid of gay marriage. And all he's got is procreation, because that's the argument that natural law makes. And people in comments have been saying, I think accurately recognizing, he's just trying to make this about procreation. And of course, you can't really do that. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're doing that, you're going to be against birth control. You're going to take some really unpopular positions. And you're actually going to be violating pretty standard evangelical beliefs, theories about marriage and sex and the purpose of all of it.
Right.
You'll be right on with certain very traditional Catholic views, but that's about it. And I think that's not comfortable for where he is. So I think there's a lot of sort of hand waving that has to be done. You saw where he sort of said some straight couples don't have kids, but that's not the norm. Not the norm is an interesting way to put that. Is he saying that childless straight marriages are also an attack on marriage?
Right. That's where you kind of dies the death of 1,000 qualifications, right? Like, well, what is the norm? And by the way, to your point, and I want to be clear, I'm not accusing Frank or Melissa of holding these views. What I will say is that the world that Frank inhabits with Turning Point and those folks, there is a growing movement, right, to get rid of access to birth control. There is a growing movement to start banning over-the-counter birth control pills. There is a movement for that. So make no mistake, in these far-right nationalist spaces, you're absolutely correct, Billy. There is a push to say this is the purpose of sex, which, like you said, does really stray from the typical evangelical Mark Driscoll, sex is pleasurable, save it for your wedding night because sex is so much fun thing. And now it says, well, if you're not having children, is your marriage really legitimate? Right? And it's a slippery slope.
No, it absolutely right. No, but this is the interesting thing. Al Mohler wrote about this immediately in the wake of the marriage decision of Obergefell. He said, I think maybe we need to go back and reconsider the legitimacy of the Catholic view that all sexual relationships need to at least be open to procreation. Because we seem to have lost this. That might be a necessary view for us as evangelicals, he's a Southern Baptist, right, to adopt in order to start winning this culture war. So Frank is speaking in a conversation out of a conversation that does exist in these very conservative, evangelical, and then right-wing Christian, again, tried Catholic type circles.
And we don't have time to get into that. That's a whole different video, but it's a good indication that, again, there's so much shifting happening in our culture right now. So let's not pretend that folks operating in the world that Frank inhabits politically are just standing up for consistent values. They have certainly moved their goalpost. I guess they could accuse certain people on our end of doing the same thing, whatever. But let's not pretend that somehow they've always been consistent. They're definitely shifting even their own standards.
Yeah, it still has advantages to society. But when you look at the purpose of marriage from a societal perspective, the reason the government's involved in marriage is not to recognize romantic affinity. The reason the government's involved in marriage is to procreate or to protect and propagate society, to stabilize and propagate society. That's the reason the government's involved in marriage. It's not to recognize that John loves Mary or Bill loves Steve or any of those things. I mean, why would the government care about that? Really, when you think about it? I mean, when you went for your marriage license, they didn't ask you, do you really love him? Do you really love her? No, they don't ask you that question. Yeah. They're asking you questions about procreation.
No, they're not. I applied for a marriage license. There was no question of, do you plan on having children? If so, how many? What's your timeline? I mean, that wasn't the question. I live in New Jersey. We went to our county clerk. They gave us an application. We filled it out. My parents signed it. My in-laws signed it. We had an official ceremony. We got our license that said, congratulations. Legally, we now see you as a married couple. And here's how it works tax-wise. Here's the rights that you have now, like visitation rights, power of attorney rights, etc. And queer people are simply saying, hey, a lot of us are in committed long-term relationships and we like those same legal rights. And Frank's response is, no, the government's job is really to promote procreation. And that's what they do. Therefore, your marriage is invalid. It's like, what?
Yeah. No, again, and he's gonna, I don't know if it's before or after this, he sort of hand waves away. He's like, what about a couple that's infertile? The government does actually allow and has always allowed, 75-year-old straight couples to get married. There's no sense of, well, I don't think you're going to have a kid, right? We're worried. that you might not
Right.
procreate. The idea that the government's laws about marriage, that marriage exists as a legal thing to protect procreation, is just, it's bizarre. I don't know where he's coming from with it, honestly,
Yeah.
because it's
not in our
just,
Constitution.
right? It's not part of any part of history. It's
By
there.
court,
Humans
here.
have historically pair bonded. It's what we do.
Yeah.
And they needed a way to legalize and legitimate and recognize that tendency.
Thing. Because that's why the government's involved in marriage. And it really wasn't the same-sex, the LGBTQ community that has given us same-sex marriage, Melissa. It's really Christians who bought into the romance view of marriage.
God, I'm gonna
We're the
vent.
ones that said, well,
I'm gonna
marriage is
vent
just
so
about
hard.
romance. Well, if it's just about romance, why not 2 men or 2 women? That's what brought us genderless marriage. It's really
Yeah.
hard.
And you've been vocal about this too lately, where I always like that when people in any group take some sort of responsibility, right? Where they're like, well, hey guys, we got to look at us and see what we did over time to kind of get us where we're at today. And because that's what we would want from people we disagree with too, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So I think that's healthy insight. So
No. Hold the phone. If anything, with all due respect to Frank and Melissa, if anything, you should be asking, how did you give us Trump? If anything, you should be asking, why is Frank hanging out with Charlie Kirk, who's platforming folks like Alex Jones and defending him? If anything, you should be outraged. This should be a video on the fact that Andrew Tate is being softballed interviewed by Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. Okay? Those are the questions you should ask, because I'll tell you right now, I believe, and I believe I can back this up, any legitimate historian, conservative or not, will tell you how historically, in particular, evangelicals, and for a while many Christians, but really white evangelicals, the most powerful Christian group in America, have been so outspoken against gay marriage. They have thrown so much money towards lobbying groups. They continue to attack that legal framework. They are targeting is it a Burgerfell? Is that what it's called? The Supreme Court case that federalized it. They are very clear. They are outspoken. We know, if you're a Christian, the Barna Group, this is data from the Barna Group, in 2007, they did a book called Unchristian, and the perception by most non-Christians was that Christians in America, all of them, whether they agree with it or not, are homophobic, are anti-queer. Okay? We know that you guys do not like queer people. We know that you tell us you love them, but in reality, you fight tooth and nail to stop every single right possible for them legally, and no one is forcing you, Melissa or Frank or Charlie or whoever we're talking about, to leave your heterosexual marriage and get married to someone of the same sex. That's imposing. We're simply saying, can other people live their life how they need to in a free and open society that guarantees the same access to rights for all people in the country? That's not a big ask. Thanks, Billy.
100% agree. Very well said. It's too long for bumper sticker, but I was trying to research some version of Frank Turek says Mark Driscoll gave me gay marriage. Thank you, Mark Driscoll. And I'm trying to find. There's a T-shirt there somewhere. I gotta figure this one out. Other than that, no, like that's all I have to add because that was phenomenal. Absolutely.
Thanks.
parse that out a little bit more. Because you've been vocal about this, where Christians have some responsibility in this regard. What do you mean by that? How would you say
Love to know, Frank.
There has been an effect? Is it because Christians haven't been involved? They just like, we don't want to be involved with this. This isn't really our place. Is that what it is, or is there a little bit more on that?
Well, the first no-fault divorce law came out of California, signed by Ronald Reagan.
No-fault divorce.
California. Well-intended, he thought. People are trapped in bad marriages. We've got to get them out of it. The problem is the negative consequence of that is that now people can leave a marriage without, no matter whose fault it was, and leave the other person stranded.
Okay, I need to pause. Now, this is when I get a little more concerned, because going after no-fault divorce is a hard right talking point. Now, I do a lot of work in that tracking of the Christian nationalist space. And this is like this is the Texas GOP's political platform in 21-22 to get rid of no-fault divorce. A lot of white nationalists use this language. Now, again, I want to be clear, I'm not accusing Frank of being a white nationalist. I'm just saying, whether he realizes it or not, he is pulling a talking point that is rooted in a very misogynistic, men are in charge, women submit law, because ultimately no-fault divorce gave equal rights to women to have agency and power to leave a marriage without having to tell the government why they're doing that. So this one, for me, talking point, I was like, it was a major red flag. Like, they went across my head, like red flag all the way across.
No, absolutely. I didn't think to look in his book, but I actually would not be shocked to find that this is a relatively new talking point for him since it became something on the right, because it's not something I remember being part of the conversation in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2012.
Yeah.
It is new, and it's really disturbing. I mean, no-fault divorce. Okay, I do want to say this. They're always, conservative, anti-trans, anti-queer voices tend to be very, very skeptical about government as good when it comes to the government is supporting queer rights, right? And at the same time, they're not going to acknowledge that no-fault divorce is how abused women can leave marriages when they can't legally prove the abuse. And we can't always legally prove abuse, right? So the legal institutions get to be perfect when they want them to be perfect. That would be a problem because, of course, we have a legal system to take care of those problems. But then they're completely imperfect and unjust when they are making decisions that the conservatives don't like. And it's really dangerous.
Great point.
And a lot of times the reason they do that is because they no longer have romantic feelings for the other person. Well, if marriage is all about feelings, don't take the vow, because you can't vow feelings for the next 50 years. You can't vow I'll never be hungry or I'll never be angry. You can't. Mm-hmm. All you can do is vow behavior. And by the way, you don't need a vow when you're all lovey-dovey with your spouse, right? Mm-hmm. You don't need a vow.
Don't reduce gay marriages to being all about feelings.
Yeah,
it's rude. Again, it's not kind. He's not following his rules, and they're talking. This is what I mean. This is what I mean when I say they're talking about us. They're not talking to us. It's not that there isn't a queer person as a third member on the screen. It's that this is the kind of conversation that only makes sense if there isn't a queer person in the room not involved in that conversation generally.
Yeah. And I want to be clear too, for me at running an organization, the New Evangelicals, I'm not always perfect at this, but I do my best to know my limits. I try and bring on the podcast people who are qualified to talk about topics that I'm interested in but aren't qualified to talk about, like you and your brother, right? And other folks. And I feel like in this world, of the apologetics world, for some reason, they just feel like they're qualified to talk about everything, right? Like Frank's PhD, I think, is in apologetics from Southern.
It's in apologetics.
Yeah, it's not in human sexuality. It's not in whatever we're talking about. And so it's frustrating because, again, I want to be clear. I'm not saying I do it perfectly, but we have to realize that we're not going to be qualified to speak publicly about everything in an authoritative manner. So we should just know our limits and bring people on who we could look at as qualified, right? And so it's just frustrating to even watch this conversation happen. It's like, wait, what are your qualifications besides I'm conservative, I'm an apologist, and here I am.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, you're infatuated. You're not going anywhere. You need a vow when you wake up in the morning and you go, you again. Right? That's when you need the vow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Christians have bought into the you again idea of marriage. Oh, you're not the one for me anymore. I got to find somebody else who really lights my flame. And so we bought into no-fault divorce. That spread across the country. And now people think marriage is just about the romantic affinity of two adults. So why not two men or two women? That's just where it goes. It's our fault. We're the ones that brought this on ultimately, because we didn't view the covenant view of marriage that I'm with you for better or worse. Mm-hmm. I'm with you because we need to love one another, even when we don't like one another. Mm-hmm. And we need to bring up children, and we need to stay together, at least for the sake of the children. And we have this covenant together before the state and before God. And of course, from a Christian perspective, this marriage is an illustration of our ultimate union with Jesus.
Yeah.
Just really quick, I mean, if I was talking to Frank, here are the questions I would ask him. First, I would ask him, are any other types of marriages that are not Christian legitimate? If two atheists get married, is it legitimate? If a Buddhist and a Hindu get married, is that legitimate, etc.? I would also ask him, because he's very big on keeping the family together, which I think is, in most cases, very healthy to do. And my question would be, okay, suppose that you have at your church two men who are married to each other show up with their 4 legally adopted kids, right? For whatever reason, they have these kids and they've been with them since they were young, they've raised them, and now those people, quote unquote, get saved. What is the solution? Do you say, sorry, the Bible's clear, your marriage is a sham, break up the marriage, send the kids back to foster care? What do you do in that situation? I mean, what's the option, right? And I'm sure Frank would give me an answer. I'm not saying he couldn't answer that, but that would be the question I would want to ask him is like, so when it comes down to it, when something's already set in motion beyond your control, right, that goes against what you think is the natural law and your biblical perspective, do you break up the family or not? Like, what's the more ethical thing to do in that situation? To me, I think it's clear, but I would like to know Frank's answer to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, lots of queer families have children. I have 3 kids, right? Like,
yeah,
it's a
right.
Yeah,
good. Keep going. Woo!
Yeah, and I think it's just so everybody knows, it's not like we're advocating for, abusive marriages. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're not sitting here and saying, I hope people read stuff into what we do and don't say. But obviously what we're saying is that everything Frank is saying, I agree with that. I think that there's just this easy way out on some levels, and it's tough.
To be clear, I'm not saying they believe or think that this is the outcome, but arguing for no-fault divorces absolutely do contribute to abuse in marriages. I just want to put it out there for the world to hear it.
It is tough sometimes to stick that out, and there's good societal reasons for that. Now, there's so much more that you say about this in your book, and you give lots of stats, and you talk more about same-sex marriage. Let's transition over to something that I just have no cant with, which is the transgender craze. This has really been a big reason why I started homeschooling my girls. Best decision ever, by the way. It's really good. It's going well. But
here we go.
All right.
Yeah,
there are people I know. This is something that I wanted to ask you specifically about. That it's like they just don't believe that this is an issue, right? Maybe they're leftists. Maybe they just look at us like we are nuts. Like they think that we are just hateful and just being mean. They just don't believe that homosexuality and transgenderism, this whole thing, is being forced on people, not through media, not through schools, not through TV, and they're just being represented. All right, that's all we're doing, guys. We're trying to give them representation. They're a minority and they've been through a lot, and we just want them to be noticed and recognized and respected. Nobody's forcing this down y'all's throats, and I just adamantly disagree. And I know.
Really quick, I know you're going to respond to a lot of that. Actually, why don't you respond first, and I'm going to play the video of the so-called non-hate that people in these circles have for trans people.
Yeah, and like big content warning on that video.
Definitely.
For sure. No, this is she's asking him to respond, so it's really fascinating at this moment in his video, because she's sort of saying they don't, they say that we're overreacting. Well, they are overreacting. Like that is what I say. They aren't. They're saying we're just talking about visibility. Yes, we're just saying it's about visibility. That showing people that gay couples exist isn't making your kids gay. And what I'm really interested to do someday, maybe, but what do you have to believe about trans people and about gay people to think that showing a child the existence of a gay couple or a trans person is going to make them gay or trans? Like that,
right?
The idea that will do that actually betrays a lot about what you think about what it means to be gay or what it means to be trans. So yeah, I think that's about all I want to say at this specific point. They're about to jump into, he's going to start citing statistics, and we'll talk about.
We're going to unpack all of those. Friends, by the way, thank you for being here on this live. This is something new that we're doing, and Billy put a lot of work into this video as well as I did. So thanks for hanging out with us. I know it's a longer video, but it's important that we go through this. So I love your feedback in the comments. Of course, you can give us a subscribe button if you like the video, and give us a little like. I'm going to play a montage that we actually shared on our Instagram a couple months ago, because someone was online and said, people think that we hate trans people. We don't hate you. We love you. And I said, oh, really? So I'm going to play this montage. Content warning. It is very hateful. Okay, but these people usually have the ears of the folks like the Franks and the Melissas of the world when it comes to media consumption and for political commentary. So here's the video, buckle up, and then we'll get into it.
Transgenderism must be eradicated.
Obviously, she does not have a son or daughter that is trans, no more than somebody has a dog that is a vegan, but whatever, I guess.
Your cellmate, that guy dressed as a woman, he's going to you.
I'm a girl. It is a cancer on the country.
And the Republican Party will be the party that protects children from such an evil that I cannot believe it exists in this time.
These people are demonic.
Looks like they bought their wig at a dollar store.
If I were running the school, I would not allow that student to come into the school that is from a same-sex household.
Not just people, they are people that are empowered by demonic spirits.
And just stand there and look like a freak of nature.
Involving children in drag events in any capacity should be outright criminalized everywhere.
They platformed a biological male who won a national championship. Someone should have just took care of it the way we used to take care of things in the 1950s or 60s.
But the trans movement is the mirror image of Christianity and therefore its natural enemy.
So there you go. All of those people, by the way, including Charlie Kirk, who Frank does work with, are well embedded in the right-wing evangelical consciousness. They are listened to by millions of people. Many are white evangelicals. And so that's my data to prove to people like Melissa that actually you might think that you as an individual are not being hateful, but the systems you participate in, the people you associate with, are actually part of a larger entity that is really dehumanizing queer people in rhetoric, and that rhetoric leads to violence. I didn't even dig into the bomb threats at Vanderbilt Hospital when Matt Walsh targeted. So we need to understand that there are very real threats to queer people because of this kind of rhetoric. And I really hope that if Melissa and or Frank are watching this, they would really take seriously the clips I just played, because they all are in context, by the way. I didn't just pull up random clips. If you watch the full videos, they're in context. And these are the people that are platformed by the Charlie Kirks, by certain Christian nationalists that are in the culture or the water of these spaces.
No,
okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you want to anything you want to say?
Yeah, I was going to just say that one of the things that I'd want to point out to somebody like Frank or Melissa, you mentioned a while back, we're not new, right? Trans people have always existed. We have been an active part of the LGBTQ plus community. I mean, let's just say since Stonewall, well known, like well recognized, this has been a part of what's going on. What is pretty new is evangelical hatred of trans people. I'm old enough to remember. I have someday I'll have to dig them up. I have emails back and forth with very conservative Bible college professors where I would ask them about trans questions, and I got a very this is a complicated and nuanced biblical issue. Christians could come down to all kinds of different ways on it. The Bible doesn't really talk about this essential sense of who you are. Maybe the soul is gendered. They took a lot of complicated, nuanced views on it because it wasn't a culture war issue. Yep. It's not something they start. They talk about the transgender craze. And I think it would honestly be fair to flip that and say, start talking about the anti-transgender craze. Yeah. It's troubling.
And put that in the context, folks who are watching this, of this is the culture war playbook since really Jerry Falwell and the moral majority started it, right? So you have the abortion crisis all of a sudden, even though decades before that, the SBC, for example, was actually very much a pro-choice organization. Then you have the demonic panic, or satanic panic, sorry. Then you have the liberals are coming for America. Then you have whatever else, insert culture war issue here. It's critical race theory, it's gay marriage, it's socialism, it's Obama. There's always something that is life or death. The soul of the nation is at stake. And of course, ironically, the one time I think that's actually the case is when we have a man in power, or who was put in power by those same people who literally incited an insurrection. So just keep that all in mind as we go through this. All right, let's get back to this video. I know there's a lot to go through still.
There's people watching that may just be completely oblivious to this. As apologists, though, I think it's really important to understand how and why we got to where we're at and understanding that perspective. And I still think it's really odd that people just oh, you guys got it wrong. Nobody's forcing this down your throats. And I'm like, okay, well, people are losing jobs if they don't agree with this. There's actual consequences. If, you're in a student meeting, you're in a teacher's meeting, and they ask your name and pronouns, right? I mean, it's strange. It's it's nobody's forcing it. And this is why what Greg
the weirdest
talks
thing
about
to be
the
mad about.
totalitarianism.
Yeah, sure.
It's under the guise of tolerance, love, and coexist stickers. And what I'm wondering if you could give a response to this perspective. Like, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, when somebody says, if you're in a business right now and they're trying to force you to admit or to cite your pronouns, I think you ought to have a meeting with your HR person and say, hey, I just have a question about some of our policies. And I don't want to question anyone's intentions here. I think all intentions here are good. I just think there may be some unintended consequences that people may not have realized by this policy. And my first question would be, do you think it is okay to try and force people to violate their consciences? And see what
Frank believes that, by the way. Frank has no problem saying something to someone that would violate their conscience, right? Because then, oh, well, you know what? Regardless of what you feel, the reality is, the truth is, you're this. And so I can't lie to you. So even if it violates your conscience, you just have to deal with it. So this is very much a one-way street for Frank, right? For Frank, he can't make room for someone who maybe he would not agree with on a whatever spectrum you want to say it is. So he can't just play ball and say, yeah, no problem, for the sake of, everyone getting along. Yeah, I'm Frank, he, him, right? Instead, it's, well, actually, let me violate your conscience and who you are, who you identify as, and say, you're just lying to yourself. I know you better than you do. And as a good Christian, I have to love you by telling you that you're not who you think you are. Oh, don't tell me to get into it because you're violating my conscience now. That's how it works. It's so disingenuous.
Yeah, no, it's really weird. Again, I'm trying to keep score, trying to track this conversation sort of without without losing the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
So far, Melissa has said that it's really important. She pulled her kids out of public school and is homeschooling them so that she and they wouldn't be required to tell people what pronouns are appropriate to them. Nobody's telling you to use different pronouns.
Right.
Nobody's saying call yourself a boy even though you understand yourself to be a woman or a girl. They're just saying, hey, would you mind letting us know what pronouns to use when addressing you? We don't want to assume. We think it's a good corporate culture to have it as a sort of standard thing that everybody includes their pronouns in their bio or in their footnote, in the footer for their email, right? Like, I grew up evangelical. I very evangelical. At no point do I remember not telling people what my pronouns are, being a part of the faith. It's a very strange position.
I agree. It's strange, and it's like, okay, you want to make this the mountain you want to die on? Okay. Weird.
Because if they say yes, they've just probably violated the Civil Rights Act. If they say no, which is the right answer, then you might say, well, please don't ask me to violate mine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here at this place to work.
I think he really is just trying to set up another really quick gotcha moment. Like this, he's giving a tactic, a clean, quick tactic to Christians to use in the workplace, right? It's a quick, hey, do you think people should be required to violate their conscience? The obvious HR answer is always going to be no to that, despite the fact that who knows how people's consciences are formed, and if somebody's conscience told them to kill kittens, you would be told, no, you're not allowed to do that, right?
Right.
People's consciences are formed in all kinds of ways. So of course that's actually not the case, but I really do think this one is just a straightforward, here's a little tidbit. He's throwing it out. Christians, you go to a conference. It's the kind of thing that, again, as a youth group kid, you come home from the conference with a quick, I'm going to use this the next time somebody says this to me, right?
Yeah, and also, I just want to point out, like, I was taught, again, I'm like you, Billy, I grew up very evangelical. I was taught that love lays down their life, that love puts their preferences behind in front of other people, right? So even if this was for Frank like a major issue, the Christian response to me is like, whatever I can do to show you that I love you, I'm going to be willing to do, even if it's inconvenient to me, which is literally just saying your pronouns. But for Frank, it's no, our conscience, our rights, what we deserve. So for me, it's a very inverted way, I think, of behaving as a Christ follower, but that's just my take on it.
To provide anything I can here for the company to succeed. I pledge that I'm going to treat everybody with respect because they're made in the image of God. But that doesn't mean we have to agree on every moral or political issue. If that were the case, no company could come together because not everyone's going to agree on every issue. Mm-hmm. So I would simply ask them that question, that do you think you ought to try and force somebody to violate their conscience. And if they say yes, they're in big trouble. If they say no, you could say, great, then don't ask me to violate mine. There's other questions you could ask as well, but that would be where I would go. And of course, Greg in his book Tactics says there's another question you can ask. Do you consider yourself a tolerant person, right? From a personal perspective. And of course, they're going to have to say yes. And then you can say, great, if I have an opinion on a controversial issue that is different from yours, you'll tolerate it.
Opinion
then, right?
or objective fact? Which one is it, Frank?
So
you know,
I think just asking for tolerance, using their very phrases and their words can help them realize that what they're doing is wrong. That's why I asked the lady at Cisco, you know, how do you define tolerance? How do you define diversity?
He's an apologist, but he's talking tactics, not truth. It is actually starting to get troubling to me that he has his doctorate in apologetics. That's not a doctrine I know a lot about, so I'm not going to comment on it. But that his interest seems to be in how to win little fights rather than on how to get at truth, even how to persuade people of what you believe to be true in a way that is and should be compelling. I mean, in philosophy,
it's persuasive,
we talk a lot about the difference between, if you convince somebody by an argument that you don't actually think ought to, but you trick them, you're making the world worse. You're not making the world better, even though you've moved them over to your side of things. And it's really, as a Christian, it's kind of troubling that he seems more interested in this tactics approach than in deep conversations about truth.
And as soon as they begin to define it, they're not going to be able to answer the question without contradicting themselves. Because that's what this is. Now, if people don't think this is forced upon you, you haven't realized what's going on at the federal level or in the state of California.
Here we go.
At the federal level, on March 31st, and I document this in the book, Correct, Not Politically Correct, March 31st, 2022, President Biden came out on Trans Visibility Day and talked about how trans people are brave and how they're made in the image of God. Of course, they're made in the image of God.
Yeah.
What he left out was the second part of the verse, that he made them male and female. And then his HHS department put out a memo
we'll let
that
it go for now.
said that if you're a parent and your child identifies as another gender and you do not affirm them with what is now called gender-affirming care, a nice sounding phrase, the government may come and take that child from you. And in California, I think they just passed a bill that said that.
Yeah.
That the government can come into your home if your 3-year-old girl thinks she's a boy and you don't affirm that. They're going to come and take that child from you potentially.
Okay. We have slides now. Yeah. Okay. I've been waiting to drop these slides I'm like, when can I unleash them? Billy, I will be your slide person. You are the narrator. Where would you like to start? And just to summarize, the claim from Frank is, hey, you don't think this is being forced upon you? Well, the government is willing to knock down your door and take your children away if you don't affirm them. And in Biden's liberal agenda is just coming for the kids. That's kind of like the take behind it. So go ahead.
Right. No, so I'm coming from a community that is very concerned that Biden's not doing enough for us. So I was really thrilled. I was really shocked, actually, honestly, when I heard that Biden had passed some memo that secretly is going to make it to the government. This was weird, and I had to look it up because I hadn't heard about it. And again, I think I keep my ear to the crowd, what's going on, in the trans community. So I looked it up. He is talking. There are 2 memos, in fact. These federal memos that were released by different agencies. If you want to go to the NCTSN.
Okay.
Let me. Bit.
Which one is it? Sorry.
So there's the SAM-HSA one, and then there's the you can do either one of them actually.
I'll find it. Just SAM, you said.
So, NCTSN is the one we're looking for right now.
Okay, I will find it in a second. I'm going through all of them. I label them very different for my own brain.
Right, no worries. Yeah.
And now here I am.
It's got a blue top with a yellow blobby on it too.
Blue top. Got it.
So.
Sorry, dude. Hold on.
No worries.
Blue top. I got this one. The Journal of Adolescent Health. That's not it.
No, we're looking at gender-affirming care is trauma-informed care.
Oh, okay. I know where that one is.
Stress Network.
Okay, I can do this. I'm gonna.
And this is really worth looking into because of it's really kind of revealing about how this works. How being scared about this.
This one.
Trying to make this. That's not the one. That's later.
Dang it!
Sorry. Gender-affirming care is trauma-informed care by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network.
Maybe I didn't add this one. Can you?
I think I might be able to. I've got a share screen button here. Let me see if we can do that.
Give it a shot.
Let's see here. There it is. Let's see. Are we popped up here? Or could you have an option?
Oh, yeah. I see. I can solo it.
There we go. Perfect.
Boom!
All right, there we are. Look at that. Look at that. Okay. So the full wording of this memo that he's so really worried about, it says providing gender-affirming care is neither child maltreatment or malpractice. The child welfare system in the U.S. is charged with improving the overall health and well-being of our nation's children and families, should not be used to deny care or separate families working to make the best decisions for their family's well-being. This is the exact opposite of what Frank is going to claim this memo is saying. Then it says, so after that, after establishing families shouldn't be separated because a parent, and by the way, they're saying because a parent is affirming. So they're saying don't separate families. And they're actually focusing, the context for this was the threat that families with trans kids would have the kids removed, right? This is what Texas was doing.
Right.
Was threatening to do, right? So this is the context in which the memo came out. And they're saying, the federal government was saying, don't do that. And then they say there's no scientifically sound research showing negative impacts from providing gender-affirming care. The decision for the child welfare system to become involved in the lives of families, potentially to the extent of removing children from their families and homes, should be wielded with the utmost care, grounded in evidence, and always prioritizing the well-being of the children and preservation of families. So you can see, like, this is a memo that is saying, hey, don't pull kids out of families just because the family is affirming and is providing gender-affirming care to their trans kid.
Right.
And again, it was published in the context of Texas literally threatening to take trans kids away from their affirming families.
Right.
That's the context that the government did this. Then, and I'm gonna do this next one here too, from the American. So I had to figure this out. I went and I looked at Frank's book. What he cites
this one.
Yep, that's the one. He cites Rod Dreher in the American Conservative, citing the memo. I don't have any idea whether Frank has actually read the memo.
Right.
And what Rod does is really, really troubling. We kind of need to go a little bit further down on that one.
Look at me. I'm a noob. Do you have it on your end?
I've got it on mine. Let's do mine again here.
Goodbye. And we switched positions too on top of that. Okay.
We got there. No. That's weird. Okay. So you'll notice that they pick it up right at halfway through the paragraph. They pick it up. Rod cut out the part that says, don't separate kids from families if you at all can avoid doing it. Right? And it jumps straight to, there is no scientifically sound research showing negative impacts from providing gender-affirming care, the decision. And then he gets really freaked out about this, the fact that they even bring up the possibility of separating a kid from their family. Even though the actual memo says, don't do this, he's saying by bringing it up, they're threatening to do it. That's the entirety of what they're talking about.
Right.
So
it's hogwash.
Right. It's exactly like what Frank is worried about here is a memo that says the opposite of what he is saying should cause you to be worried.
Right.
And that's, again, from an apologist, that's concerning. I don't want to speculate on how that happened, how much research was or wasn't done.
Right.
But it's concerning.
Right. I think we should also go to the other one too, because he cites California as well. Right. And I had that. That one I definitely do have. That is right here. Boom. All right. So. Right there. And I looked this. I actually commented underneath the original video because I was like, guys, if you just read it once, you'll see that this is not at all because Frank's claim is that the government in California can just knock down your door and take your kid away. That is not the circumstance. So do you want to go ahead and explain this?
Sure. Yeah. No. This is a law in California. One, it hasn't passed yet, but I think it's on the third reading.
Yep.
But again, all it does is it adds the question of affirmation to one of many factors that the state should consider when custody has already been brought to the table, right? So
right. It's already being disputed.
Like a divorce, where there is an investigation on the basis of, on the basis of abuse, right? There's an abuse investigation going on.
Yes.
When custody is now in question, this bill says affirmation is one thing among many that the state should take into consideration. Right. This is not saying anything like the state of California is going to come in and take your kids away if they say they're trans and you don't give them puberty blockers.
Exactly. And it hasn't passed, to be very clear. And also, it makes a lot of sense that this would be something to consider, right? Because if you're in a situation where one partner is being accused of abusing the children, right, the judge should be able to factor in, well, is gender affirmation part of that? Because we know, and we'll get into the data on this in a little bit, we know that statistically, the data as we know it is pretty clear that gender affirmation greatly reduces the risk of self-harm and unaliving themselves, and so that's an important factor in this. All right, anyway, shall we keep going through the video?
Yeah, let's do it.
This is madness, Melissa. And I don't care if you're a Christian or not. If you don't stand against that, you don't know how to stand against evil.
It's amazing.
That's evil.
It's
to
not
have a
evil.
government come into your house and take your child away from you,
and it's propaganda.
And then potentially give your child puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and maybe even surgery. Something, by the way, that's impossible, as I talk about in the book. You can change your mind. You can't change your gender.
It is mind-blowing to me that Frank can sit there with a straight face as someone who has done academic work and really think that he's being truthful in how he represents this. Either he did no research or he is pulling from the right-wing propaganda playbook, right? And this is very common. We hear all the time. They have this perception that there are places in America with 7-year-olds wrapped around the block who are just waiting to have bottom surgery. Like, that's what they think is happening. And it's not happening. Like, it's not. And the cases where someone under 18 has any kind of surgery are extremely rare and usually incredibly situational, And so I think that's really important. Also, am I getting dizzy, or did your camera
I got blurry
just
and I have no idea why. I don't know what happened here. I'm going to try to.
Wow. Oh, there we go. There we go.
I'm back.
So anyway,
I'm
all right, we'll keep going.
It's impossible. It's in every one of your 100 trillion cells. You can change your mind, but you can't change your biology. And yet that's what this entire movement is trying to do, change your biology. And the research shows that people that actually go through with the surgery, 10 years after the surgery, have a suicide rate 19 times higher than the general public.
Okay,
which is very interesting.
You got to pause him. Okay, so all of my trans friends who are watching this, take a shot. He just brought up the Swedish study. Every single one of them bring this up. It's exhausting. I can't, I think trans people are exhausted by the Swedish study, but nobody is more exhausted by the Swedish study and this use of it than the author of the stupid study. Because it's not even a a bad study.
This is the study, right? You're talking about?
This is the one. This is the yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the Dejne study. So this is a study. It was done in 2011, and it did measure the long-term health impact, mental health, impacts. Not impact of, but just the mental health status of trans people who had surgery, right? This is what it did. And it did find elevated risks of depression and unaliving compared to, and Frank does actually say this, which is interesting, compared to cisgender people. Not compared to those same people prior to the surgery, because the actual information out there, the data is very clear that, and we can bring some of these up if we wanted to, but we'll get to them later, that transition care is actually really good for trans people's mental health, right? Transitioning is actually quite good for us. It doesn't disconfirm that. In fact, if we want to go to it, the poor researcher who has done this.
Is this one? This one?
It's one of the two. Cecilia Dejne has so many times had to debunk conservative or anti-trans misuses of her study. She has she constantly is having to say, look, no, that's not what I said. I think there's one that it's a trans advocate. It's an interview with her in the Trans Advocate.
Yeah,
that's the one.
This one, right? Yeah.
Yep, where she says it's really frustrating. I've even seen professors use my work to support ridiculous claims. I've often had to respond myself. She cites that Huffington Post article. That was that one that we just had up. And she's exasperated. So the study's author is on the record many times saying this is a misuse. If you are trying to use my study to suggest that transition makes trans people more likely to want to self-harm, to unalive themselves, to be depressed, you are misusing my study. You are misunderstanding it. That is not, it's not just I'm pro-trans and so I don't want you using it that way. She's saying you don't understand it. You are saying the opposite of what it says.
There you go.
But it won't die. Paul McHugh used it years ago in his American College of Pediatrics article, and now everybody cites it. It's in government things now being misused. It's terrible.
Yeah. This is after the surgery. They have a honeymoon period where they feel better, but then later on, at the 10-year mark, all proverbial hell breaks loose. And tragically, the suicide rate is 19 times higher than the general public. Why? Because we've tried to treat a mental condition with surgery. You can't do that in most cases. You don't treat mental delusions with surgery. You treat it with psychiatry, with cognitive therapy, with counseling, with prayer. You don't treat it with surgery. And yet
I have to say a thing.
Of course. Interrupt me as much as you want. This is the meat and potatoes right here.
No, yeah. And this is not like a statistics thing. This is how this works thing, right? So the diagnosis that many trans people have, not all of us, right, is gender dysphoria. That's the thing he has to be talking about if he's talking about a mental condition. That's the thing that I am diagnosed with, for instance, right, is gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is the experience of extreme discomfort, of dysphoria, of this sort of misery, stress that comes from a misalignment between your gender and your physical sex, your body, right? Those two things are misaligned, right? It is ridiculous to say that you can't treat the suffering that comes from a misalignment by correcting the misalignment. And that's what he's trying to say here. He's saying, because again, I suspect that what he's trying to riff off of is the fact that earlier, before there was as much scientific study done, they didn't use gender dysphoria as the treatment, as the diagnosis. They used what they called gender identity disorder. So he would say that me understanding myself to be a woman is a mental disorder. It's not scientifically, legally, at any level. The DSM-5 would not say that. In the psychological community, what I have been diagnosed with is just the suffering that comes from a misalignment. There's nothing wrong with me understanding myself to be who I am. But he's not acknowledging that in his clever little quippy analysis. And I'm sorry, it felt clever and quippy rather than...
It almost feels like what you're saying is if two magnets are repelling against each other, flip one over so they attract. But Frank's response is, no, just keep pushing. And eventually they'll touch. It's like, well, they really won't, no matter how hard you push. Is that kind of a fair way of phrasing it?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Thank you, Billy. I appreciate that. That was off the fly.
That was well done.
Here we go.
Why? Cha-ching. You can see how much money is involved here.
The money thing.
We point out in the book, nobody ever completely transitions. They have to be on a lifetime of hormones to try and artificially force their body to go in a direction the body is not meant to go.
Okay, friends, I know we're stopping piece by piece. I know we're like 2 hours in. Thank you for being there. But you understand that we have to unpack piece by piece because there's so much misinformation. This is such a weaponization of a problem that many progressives and liberals have been calling out for decades. Okay, I remember when I was 18 watching a documentary on the problem of the pharmaceutical industry, okay, and how they price gouge and the greediness. I remember thinking to myself, wow, like these insurance companies charge so much money and profit billions of dollars on our healthcare system. And the people who were so focused on, no, we need the free market to solve the problem, now are turning around and weaponizing the exact problem that I don't think, Billy, you would disagree with at all, the for-profit medical industry, and saying, and this is why there's this trans craze, because the medical industry is greedy. Which, again, when you think about it, makes no sense because, A, trans folks are a minority, statistically speaking, of the population. So it's not very common that you're doing any type of actual surgery. Let's just start right there on most people for this particular situation. And B, if you do surgeries, Matt Walsh calls you out and you get firebombed verbally with bomb threats. Okay, so let's just stop pretending that there's some dark cabal who's like, ooh, you know how we make more money as a medical community? We push this trans craze through people so that way they pay us more money. That is ridiculous the second you think through all the logical steps.
No, absolutely. And I mean, the thing is, we'll have to do another time, but the history of the trans rights movement is a history of us fighting tooth and nail to be given access to transition healthcare with the medical establishment fighting against us. Like it's a history of trying to deal with this problem of gatekeepering for our basic healthcare. And we finally got there. And so to argue that like this is some secret that the medical community has been pushing so they can sell more estrogen is just ridiculous. I mean, it just flies completely in the face of like actual history and how things have gone.
And I don't want to speak too binary, but also if any doctor that would speak out against some kind of medical intervention is then platformed by these people. So now we trust the medical community. So on one hand, the medical community is bad and greedy and trying to trans people. On the other hand, there are some who are saying the right thing. So it's not as wide as you might think. It's like, I can't keep up. Like, is it good or bad? Anyway, let's keep it moving. We'll keep it moving.
Here we go.
Sheesh.
On and on and on. It's a boon to the medical community because they make all sorts of money. But to the people that actually go through it, it actually doesn't solve the problem.
You can believe whatever you want, but you can't change what's true.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's what they're trying to do is through this whole intolerance and inclusion and diversity language.
Gosh.
By saying, hey, this is inclusive language. This is diverse language. Use this language. And without really realizing it, you've agreed to and undergirded this sort of movement. And I think that's one reason and one way that they've kind of gotten into that. And another thing you talk about is the government coming for our children. You've talked about this.
Really quick, because we didn't touch on it, but just to be clear, and Billy, I think that you gave me some of these slides, but people who statistically transition medically very rarely regret their transition. Is that correct?
Oh, very rarely. Yeah. Do we want to do that? I mean, we can talk.
While we're here, let's just knock it out. Yeah.
Sure. Let's hit some of these.
Here we that's the mental alcohol. It's not this one, right?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay.
I mean, I threw a bunch of them at you because this is just a thing. Right. So yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is that that transition is immensely beneficial to trans people's health. At least for those that ask for it. Again, depending on what your gender in fact is, these things can be complicated.
Right, of course.
But right, so I mean, every time they've studied it recently, they keep finding massive benefits to the mental health of trans people who transition. Right. So this one is, this one's from this is the Journal of the American Medical Association.
Right.
Right. And this is the one that has, it's a 60% decreased chances of depression and a 73% lower chance of suicide. Right. Like that's enormous. And if you were told that you had a way to decrease your child's suicidality by 70%,
right,
who wouldn't jump on it? Right? Like,
no, totally.
Who wouldn't jump on it?
Was this the other one that we're talking about too?
This is a good one from this is a write-up in Scientific American, which I thought was valuable just because they combined, like, it was one of every so often somebody goes through and combines almost all of the studies to find out like what's the general trend here. So this is you look at you combine a bunch of studies and you get over 30,000 transgender and gender diverse people who have positive health outcomes from being provided with gender-affirming care, medical care.
Yep.
It's not close. This
one too, right?
Yeah, this is there's one that I really was hoping we could highlight. This one's good though. Is this one I'm thinking of? Oh yeah, no, this one's great because this is the thing that they were saying is the slippery slope. This is just about how this one shows that if you just call a trans kid by their chosen name, you will increase their mental health.
Wow.
Right? Like just doing the name. This isn't even getting into the healthcare part of it. This isn't getting into like puberty blockers or any of that stuff. Again, so again and again and again and again, every time they measure this, they find that affirming trans people and who we are, whether that's medically or socially, leads to improved mental health outcomes for trans people. Was there another one you want me to share before we move on? There's one, if I can find it, from the American Academy of Pediatrics. From 2016, which again puts it in that range of studies that Frank absolutely should know about. The title of the article is "Mental Health of Transgender Children Who Are Supported in Their Identities." All right, let me take a look here. And while you're looking for it, yeah, go ahead. To my mind, this is one of the most striking ones, and one that I always try to bring up because their findings were they studied children who are trans and gender diverse. And they found that trans and gender diverse children who were affirmed in their identities had mental health issues at the same rate as their cis peers. That is to say that all of the sort of comorbidities, all the things that people blame for transness went away. These kids were just as mentally healthy as their peers if you just affirmed them in their gender identities and supported them.
Wow. Great. Let's keep going.
Before.
We're almost done. Almost there.
You just kind of flat out come out and say, yeah, the government says they're coming for your kids. I'm wondering if you talk more about that. Because you and I, before we got on, and this is one thing I really wanted to pick your mind about, and I waited till we're online to talk about it. But you watched, what is the name of the
here we go.
Crazy Town.
I haven't seen it yet. I just heard the interview that
That's right.
Jordan Peterson had with Tim Ballard and Jim Caviezel. There's a new movie called Sound of Freedom.
Yes.
Yeah.
July 4th. Believe it or not, this small movie put out by Angel Studios, the same people that put out The Chosen. The movie, despite the fact being in 2,000 fewer theaters, grossed more than the Indiana Jones movie the first day it came out. Yes. Because Jim Caviezel plays this guy, Tim Ballard. Tim Ballard was with the Department of Homeland Security and for a while was going out and trying to rescue kids who had been kidnapped into the sex industry, the trading, the sex trafficking of children. And he ultimately gave up his government job to do this privately and started Underground Railroad, I think it is. In any event, this podcast.
Really quick, you notice how we're moving now from being trans to now protecting children from human trafficking, right? Like this is like the next evolution, because for them this is all linked. You know, if you are queer, to them you are just like one thread away, one step away from trying to abuse, hurt, traffic children. And now this is go ahead.
No, I was just saying, like, and it's really worth, like, I think for watching this stuff, you really have to keep in mind that the only link they've made is slippery slope. They have not established any kind of actual link between any of this stuff.
I think that's really important to mention. And this is, friends, we have about 8 minutes left in this interview, so we're almost there. But this is when this conversation for me goes off the rails. Like, now we're in the land of, well, I'll just play the video and you get to watch.
Yes, you have to listen to. It's the Jordan Peterson podcast.
I'll leave a link in the description.
Yeah, you can't unhear it. That's the problem. Once you hear it, the kind of horrific things that are going on with regard to sex trafficking. And Tim, in this podcast, talks about one of the problems that we're experiencing in America. First of all, there's a big demand, believe it or not, for pedophilia in America.
Okay, we have to stop right here because there are a lot of things that are true at one time. Number one, the trafficking of children is abhorrent, it is real, it happens, and it is bad. Let's just get that out of the way right now. We obviously should all be aligned that we stand against the trafficking of human beings for sexual exploitation, for labor, etc. Me, you, Frank, and Melissa would all say 1,000 trillion% that's without compromise. Okay, that is a black and white thing. It can also be true that conspiracy theories use a hint of truth to then spin outrageous things that then become very harmful. And we're about to witness how a good thing of we should not be for this, we should be fighting this, is used as a drop of truth to then promote things that actually, according to actual organizations that are either government or actual nonprofits that do this stuff, end up harming the work of people working to rescue kids from trafficking. Keep that in mind as we go through this. And I'm gonna explain why as we go through.
But one of the big problems is the erosion of the moral codes that have made their way into the schools. We're now teaching kids they can be any gender they want. We're telling kids they can transition. All this feeds right into this.
What's up?
We're telling kids they can be any gender that they are. We're telling kids that who they are is who they can be. We're not saying, here's a smorgasbord, pick.
Right. Right. And also we should mention here, this is important. So this organization or this movie that they're promoting, two things you should know. Number one, the main actor, Jim Caviezel, I think is his name, has actually pushed some blatant conspiracy theories that are QAnon adjacent. We'll get into that in a minute. But also you should know this, friends. This is the organization that they are promoting. Now, this is why this is important for me. Melissa is very passionate about fighting New Age beliefs in the church. She's very passionate about staying away from the occult and witchcraft. The organization that they are saying is doing this amazing work, Operation Underground Railroad, actually used a psychic to try and locate children. This completely defies Melissa's own, and also, for the record, my belief system when it comes to trying to rescue kids. And you can read the whole article here. It's not a secret. The other thing I want to mention, and again, we'll get into this a little bit more later on, is that when it comes to the organization that is Operation Underground Railroad, Underground Railroad, they are incredibly slimy with their money. So keep that in mind, and then we'll keep going.
And so does pornography, quite obviously. And Tim makes the connection in this podcast, so I'll leave the remaining comments for him. He's a modern day hero when you read about what he's done. He gave up his government job, had 6 kids of his own to try and save a whole bunch of kids who were being trafficked. And now he runs this ministry to continue to do that.
That is a very loose telling of the story, because according to Ministry Watch, we have it right here, the Operation Underground Railroad, that's what Tim started, it's come under fire for actually soaking up a lot of money. They have more than $80 million in assets in just a few short years here. They profit millions of dollars. As a nonprofit, that's a big no-no. You have to have a certain ratio of what you're spending your actual money on for the sake of your donors. And I'll just say that there are other articles that bring into question how effective their ministry is, and if it's more about being sensationalized to try and fit into this Hollywood-esque version of like the Taken vigilante, like my kid was taken by traffickers, I have to go overseas and rescue him, versus actually doing good work. And again, I won't get into the details on that, but this organization has come under fire many times for not being very effective. And I think that's very important to recognize as we're going through this.
I can say, because I did actually, because I was curious, I went and watched that video, the Jordan Peterson one. He actually does claim, the Tim Ballard does actually claim that he's better off now than he was prior to quitting his government job. He cites it as evidence that like God was behind this the whole time and that it was the right decision, right? So he first sort of frames it as I was very, very sacrificial. I gave up a huge pension to do this, but then he comes back and he says, and because I did it, now I'm even better off than I would have been if I hadn't quit my government job. So it
makes sense. His organization has millions of dollars in assets, $80 million. That's quite a success.
Yeah.
Here's one of the problems, and we know this scripturally, that sexual sin in particular leads you into more and more horrific kinds of behavior. Not always. Let me just put it this way. Not everybody who gets involved in sexual immorality obviously becomes a pedophile. But the people that do become pedophiles, they start small. They start with just normal pornography, and they start going down a road to where, as Paul talks about it in Romans chapter 1, if you suppress the truth long enough about God and start getting involved in sexual immorality, he's going to give you up to a futile mind, to the point where you're not only doing evil, you're cheering on other people who are doing evil.
I really wish that Frank and Melissa would start talking about the widespread church abuse, the story after story of pastors who are either found years later or who are currently in prison for SAing children, for SAing women. I wish that he would bring up the Southern Baptist Convention of hiding for over a decade, countless examples of accusations of abuse. But instead, here we are trying to equate that if you're queer, you're more likely to become someone who wants to abuse children, which, I mean, there are studies on this. That is not a thing. And also, I would like to point out as well that, you know what? I lost my train of thought. So, Billy, you can take over, because I just forgot what I was going to say.
All I had to add was that he, I mean, this is just warmed over Silence of the Lambs horribleness. Right, the idea that that if you let transness go far enough, it's going to turn into something evil, sadistic, and horrible. Right?
Yes.
I think it plays on the sense, like a lot of cis people have a sense of the trans as a little bit alien, a little bit other, and a little bit hard to understand.
Totally.
And that can be scary enough that you say, well, imagine if it was even more. And of course, it's going to be more, because this person already went that far away from your view of the world. So maybe.
Right.
and it's really honestly just scaremongering. And I want to say it's not worthy of him, but I don't know enough about Frank.
Well, and then what they'll do is they use anecdotal evidence to back up their claim, right? Like, obviously people, trans or not, can do horrible things, like including to children. And there are examples of that happening. That does not somehow mean, though, that because you're trans, you're automatically more prone to that. Just like how I would never say if you're a pastor, you're automatically more prone to abusing kids, even though we have many more, I would argue, examples of that happening, right? That's not a fair comparison. I don't think being a pastor makes you intrinsically someone who wants to abuse children. And that goes for anything else that you are in life.
Yeah, I mean, to disprove his claim, you'd have to somehow find every sex pervert and find out that like none of them had done anything and gotten involved with anything else he saw as non-normative, which is ridiculous, right? Like, people have a lot of complicated interests.
Yes.
He's making these sort of unfalsifiable claims that sound good to people who want to believe them.
Yeah.
And so the people that do become pedophiles progressively go down, or let's say regressively, go down a road from pornography to child pornography to actually being engaged in the kind of behavior I don't even want to talk about. Yeah. And when you listen to this podcast, as I say, you can't unhear it, some of the things that are going on. Mm-hmm. And for us to just wink at this and go, oh, this is no big deal. Let's just keep moving the sexual lines. You know what's coming next for approval in our country? We've gone from...
Yeah, we know what you're going to say. We know where this is going.
Way back to, okay, now premarital sex is fine. Now homosexuality is fine. Now transgenderism is fine. What do you think's coming next? Pedophilia.
I don't want to think about it.
Yeah. Now the pedophiles are calling themselves minor attracted persons, right? Mm-hmm. They have to make it sound good rather than what it is. And so now when the government's involved to try and say this is a good thing, not the pedophilia, but the transgenderism, and that we need to, I mean...
What's up?
There's a lot. One, again, he's sexualizing trans people in a way that I find really upsetting. Right? Like, being a lesbian is part of my sexuality, and I'm not for a second going to throw my cis queer siblings under the bus. But being trans is not about my sexuality outside of, like, it kind of affects it because of it affects where I'm coming from. But like there are asexual trans people, right? Like, it's not actually. So he's doing this. He just means creepy. And that's really troubling. Like, for that logic to play out, that like transness is somehow more sexual than gay and lesbian and bi and panness, he's really just trying to sexualize us. And I just find it really disturbing.
No, I agree. And I do want to point out that again, I know I mentioned this quick earlier, but just to be very clear about this, Frank is really peddling. He's really flirting with some conspiracy theory talking here. This is the main actor in this movie, The Sound of Freedom, Jim Caviezel. He played Jesus in The Passion of the Christ. This guy pushes QAnon conspiracy theories consistently. You see this term here, adrenochrome. This is a big thing in the QAnon world. Adrenochrome is essentially an oxygenized form of adrenaline, but people like Jim paint this picture that there is a deep state cabal that needs the adrenaline from children to be harvested to produce this that gives you young life. It's been debunked 1,000 ways to Sunday, but this is where Jim is coming from when he makes movies like this. He's thinking about this deep state issue. I'm not sure if you were aware, folks who are watching this, of Pizzagate a couple years ago, where there was a rumor going around that there was a pizza parlor in DC that people like Hillary Clinton and other people were using as like a main spot to traffic kids through. It got so bad that someone showed up with a gun to blow the lock off a door and to get to the basement. Turns out there was no basement, and that person actually came there with the gun and actually did that. And it wasn't there. And the last thing I want to show you all, just to remind you about how conspiracies work. Remember Wayfair? Remember when there was a rumor going around that, oh my God, these cabinets are priced so high, it's code for trafficking children? Well, if you Google it, you can still find high-priced cabinets from Wayfair. Here's one for $8,000. Okay, is anyone now talking about, oh my God, Wayfair is still trafficking kids? No, because now Jim and the QAnon world have moved on to a different conspiracy. You're always moving the goalpost, because if you were consistent, you would say, look, this is still happening. Look, everyone, there are cabinets being sold, but no one cares about it anymore, even though these cabinets still exist. So I just want to point out, like, this is the world that Frank is dipping toes into, and the reason why people have asked me like crazy, Tim, what's up with this movie Sound of Freedom? The reason why it hasn't been well received by most people is because it's QAnon adjacent, and it presents a very hyperbolic, extreme example of what this guy Tim actually does that ends up hurting people ultimately. That's the problem with it. And it once again shows the connection. This has been proven. I've interviewed many people, including Jared Stacy, who have done the work. There is definitely a link between the evangelical industrial complex and culture, and them being more susceptible to conspiracy theories. Last stat I'll give you, during the 2020 election, 25% of white evangelicals believe that Joe Biden was not the true president. The highest group out of any religious demographic to believe that. So yes, this is a problem in evangelical spaces. Okay, I'm done. Almost done, friends.
Talk about this stuff.
Yeah,
but
it is.
When you have atheists like Bill Maher, like Richard Dawkins.
I mean, you can respond if you want, Billy, but like, you know,
I'm sorry.
It's like he's surprised that
two
TERFs
genders.
exist. There have been atheists who don't like trans people from the beginning.
Bill Maher brilliantly,
right?
In a show he did back in May of 2022, called "Along for the Pride," pointed out how this whole transgender craze is social media driven, and he said, "Look, kids go through phases." He said, if everyone knew what they wanted to be when they were 8, the world would be filled with princesses and cowboys.
Yeah,
but it's not. And he said, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a pirate. Thank God nobody took me seriously and took me for eye removal and peg leg surgery. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, he
do you want to respond to that, Billy, or no?
And tragically, most American pastors are silent on the issue.
All right, fine.
Mm-hmm.
How can you be silent on this stuff when kids are being mutilated? When this feeds the whole sex trafficking industry.
There it is.
How can you be silent on this?
There it is. That's the connection right there. I'll give it to Billy. I'll give it to you in just 1 second. But that is the connection, friends. There it is. If kids are being trans, that's their language, they're part of the deep state circuit to become easier, more traffic more easier. Is that even a word? I don't know. You take over.
It's late. What struck me, and maybe he's about to say it, maybe I kind of missed the moment. What broke, I don't know, what's left of a little bit of evangelical kid in me, it's like heart, is this place where he is, he says, I'm more ashamed of pastors that aren't calling out transness than I am of Bill Maher. And there is some teenage kid in me screaming about what is the gospel to you anymore? Right. What does he even understand the gospel to be? And he's an apologist. And it's, that's not to try to enter all the way back in. I'm post-evangelical by a long shot. I'm an Anabaptist. But they're so far from their own sort of stated core beliefs at this point. It just hurts a little bit to see.
I have to agree. I mean, I think a lot of us, when we left the evangelical world or when we saw Red Alarm or Red, alarms going off. Oh, God, red lights going off. Sheesh, I am tired. It's been a long one. But, we were alarmed by what we saw, right? Yep. And here we are. And I'm like, guys, you taught me that these are the non-negotiables, like faith in Jesus, maybe the Trinity, virgin birth, physical resurrection. I affirm all of these. But because we are inclusive, we're suddenly not Christian anymore. Because someone is trans, they're therefore what part of the deep state cabal? What gospel are you talking about? What Bible are we reading? What orthodoxy are we drawing from? Because trans people aren't in. They're not in the Orthodox creeds. You have to be trans or not. It's not there. Anyway. It is very interesting to watch.
It is also worth highlighting that at this point in the video, and he's 40 minutes in or whatever, right? Yeah. He was only arguing for the whole preparing kids to be trafficked thing by a kind of implication and slippery slope, and you're shaping the culture in this way. But now he just incorporated it in as part of his argument, right? He's trying to make this argument about what church leaders should be doing. Right. He just acted as though it were proved, when up until now he has very carefully been saying it suggests or it could be or it and that's slippery. That's the kind of thing we need to watch out for.
By the way, just so we all know, statistically, a child is most likely to be assaulted by someone that they know. Yeah. Someone that they're in proximity to consistently. And I promise you, most kids, first off, are not in proximity alone with strangers or drag queen story hour. Parents are there, right? To this day, there has not been one example of a child being abused during drag queen story hour. However, there have been countless examples of people in positions of spiritual authority using that power to harm and abuse children. So we just have to be honest here. Like this is a very, and again, we were clear earlier to repeat, trafficking of anyone, especially children, is horrific and bad and should be stopped. If you take that seriously, you go where the data leads. And the data suggests, and there are studies on this, that the most likely culprit is someone that they know, or being in the foster care system. And ironically, for these people, I actually have the, do I have it pulled up here? I know I had it. I pulled up a whole article, a whole study that showed that some of the highest risk of being trafficked are queer youth who are unsheltered, who have lost their family. They end up on the streets, and they end up I'm not sure it's often, but it's not uncommon for them to end up trafficked. So here we are. Here's Frank and Melissa doing everything they can to advocate for why society should not accept queer youth or to make them assimilate into their version of Christianity, which is actually creating a cycle that actually harms those youth and puts them in a position to end up in this version of trafficking that they think is happening in the public school system. Yeah. That's, when you think about it, it's wild.
If you can create the problem and then complain about it, it's a win-win. That's a cynical take, but
yeah, it is what it is.
Sometimes.
Newsflash. Everything's political now. And it's not because Christians made it political. Do you know in Canada the Bible's political now? That you can't preach certain Bible verses.
I gotta let it go. It's ridiculous.
When they come for the
Bible here all day.
Pastors, are you going to stand up? Or are you going
He's talking about James Coates.
Can't talk about that either.
Jesus.
Richard Dawkins, Bill Maher, Douglas
It's a fire
Murray,
hose. It's a fire hose.
Dave Rubin.
Watch.
These guys, Murray and Rubin, identify as gay themselves, and they're coming out against this. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was just on Dave's show just a week or two ago, and I have more respect for him than some American pastors who are silent. What are you doing? You're not talking about this. I mean, you know it from a biblical perspective that you're gonna be able to save people from by warning them about this. You can know from a philosophical perspective this thing is contradictory. In fact, let me just give you a couple of points on this. Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh.
The people who are for transgender ideology contradict themselves, because on one hand, they say there are no fixed genders, that there's a blend. You can just do whatever you want, right? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, they unwittingly presuppose there are fixed genders.
Yeah.
Because look, if I'm a man and I think I'm a woman, I have to have some idea what a man is and some idea what a woman is to know I have this mismatch between my psychology and my biology. Also, if I want to make the so-called transition, which of course is impossible, as we mentioned, you can't change your 100 trillion cells. But if I want to try, I have to have some idea what a man is and some idea what a woman is in order to make the transition. So on one hand, they're saying, oh, there are no fixed genders. On the other hand, they have to presuppose fixed genders for transgenderism to even be possible. Secondly, nature itself.
You want to stop right there? Yeah.
He's not even using the term fixed genders in a way that makes any sense. I watched this a bunch of times trying to figure out what exactly he's trying to say here in order to establish his conflict. So let me just kind of say where trans people are. I mean, we have different ideas about the world. I have a gender. I have a sex I was assigned at birth. They aren't the same. They're both like real in the sense that they affect my life. They are things I experience. They are things that everybody experiences, and like agender people, it's a little bit different. My gender and my sex didn't align. There is a gender that generally does align with that sex, and I transitioned because I want my gender to align with the sex, with my sex. That's pretty straightforward. Like, again, there are two things, and I brought them into alignment. Neither one is fake. They're just different things. That's not complicated, I don't think.
I think what Frank is saying, here's what I heard. You tell me what you think. Is that I think what he's saying is, okay, if gender is the spectrum, and and someone's gender can express beyond what their sex assigned at birth would say. And at the same time, culture, enforces gender stereotypes. What's the basis for how for someone aligning their gender? Like what's the foundation of what makes a woman gender-wise then? Does that make sense? Like that's what I think he's trying to say. That's kind of what I got out of it.
Yeah, then I think he's just wrong in saying that trans people don't believe that gender is real. We all have a lot of different spaces and ways that we understand. Like, ask a bunch of cis women what it means to be a woman, and you're going to get a lot of different answers. Ask a bunch of cis men. That's always the response I always want to have to the Matt Walsh question is, Matt, what's a man? And how's he going to define that in a way that doesn't define certain men that he would want to say are men out of the category?
Well, that it's funny because I think about that too. I'm like, well, when you really think about what how do we define men? And I think, listen, they're definitely, I guess people would say, well, it's biological. I think that's what happens, right? Because people like Frank, I think they see sex and gender as one of the same. Like there's no separation, right? So if you have certain genitalia, that automatically tells us who you are, period, and you can't ever change that. That's why the male-female dichotomy in the Genesis account is so important to this argument, right? Because, the biology is clear, therefore the gender is clear, as opposed to them being maybe separate and at times not aligned.
But you'll notice that throughout this thing, he has used procreation as the gender determinative thing. He's implied that it is based on something like genitals. He's insisted, because he keeps saying that you can't change your gender, that it's actually, I think he's referencing chromosomes, it's in every cell in your body, that kind of a thing. Right. So which one of those is it? Is it a combination? Because intersex people are going to become a really big problem. He just ignores their existence, which is itself a problem. Even if you try to reduce it all to sex, the fact is the world is more beautifully complicated. Like God made a more fascinatingly diverse world than he seems to want to admit.
Right.
And that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that most people have a sense, that every culture builds a way that male persons generally live out and experience their gender, the way they do it, perform it culturally, and all the rest of the genders. Like multiple cultures have more than two genders, but they have different ways that people perform those genders. And you're going to say, hey, look, this is actually more natural to me, right? Yeah. I find that this aligns for me better than that aligns for me. This is what makes me actually experience myself as a whole person.
Yeah.
So no, there's not a contradiction, and he's really just what he's doing is he's equivocating. I think you're right. He's equivocating between sex and gender, and then he's refusing to acknowledge that they're different, and then highlighting the fact that trans people are treating them as different, because we do treat them as different.
Right.
There's only two genders.
Oh, look, what a marathon!
All mammals can produce only one of two things: either a sperm or an egg. Now, there's no third category. You can't produce a third thing. Mm-hmm. And if you can't produce either, that's an incapacity. That's not a third capacity. So there are only two genders.
See, that's what I was saying.
People are trying to say
for him, sex and gender are one of the same.
On one hand, they're trying to say that. On the other hand, transgenderism wouldn't be possible if there weren't fixed genders. So it's internally contradictory. And as you know, people who consider themselves LGBTQ are at a bit of they're in a bit of a civil war, because if the T's get their way, Melissa, that there are no fixed genders, the L's, the G's, and the B's don't exist. Look, how can you be lesbian, gay, or bisexual if there are no fixed genders? Exactly. Those genders presuppose, so does heterosexuality, presuppose fixed genders. And the feminists aren't happy either, because if there are no genders, there are no women. If there are no women, there are no women's rights. This is why J.K. Rowling, who is probably generally liberal politically, has come out and said, I'm sorry, you're erasing women by this whole transgender movement. And she's right.
Yeah, this is the whole attempt. This is the whole attempt for conservative Christians to make sort of common cause with TERFs. And it's pretty gross. It's really reductive of women. I mean, in order for it to work, you have to reduce women to reproductive roles. And that's kind of the opposite of what feminism is meant to do.
Right.
But he's kind of trying to throw everything in the baby at this point.
Got it.
At his own thing.
There's more courage.
4 minutes, friends. 4 minutes. We're almost there.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting that you kind of call them out on that, because I think there's an element of, and I've kind of been researching this myself, but like this model a lot of churches have has a lot to do with felt needs, not necessarily preaching theology and the gospel, because the offense that it brings You got to keep
This
that
is
at a
where the
minimum.
reformed-
And so I think that's part of it.
This is where some of that reformed kind of theology starts showing through Melissa, at least, you know, like, oh, well, if it offends you, it's your problem, not our problem kind of thing. So anyway, it is what it is.
The culture, like the American gospel culture, so to speak, I think is part of it.
She's referencing the documentary, The American
spot
Gospel.
on. I think that it's really interesting because, you know, the algorithm on YouTube, people might complain about it. I like it. It puts videos like this in front of people's eyes that might be interested in it. But everything you just said about, you know, there are lesbians that are angry. There are gay men that are angry, you know, about this, the ideology that's coming along, and they're getting lumped in it. And there's these YouTubers that come up in my algorithm that said exactly what you just said. That they are in agreement with us, that they're like, do we just not exist? You know, and it's really interesting to hear their perspective on that there is a civil war going on, and they're upset about what goes on at pride parades. And they're like, why are we bringing kids into this? You know, like, we never wanted this.
We know about gays and groomers. Like, we know that group exists. They're
Right.
really excited about it, but we've known about them. It's a problem.
I've met them. They're at Turning Point America Fest. Also, I should mention that at a pride parade, the only people bringing their kids are parents. Like we're not harvesting children or bringing them to a parade. Like, parents bring their kids. And listen, we live in a free society. There are things that I would put my kids in front of, and things that I wouldn't, regardless of the sexual expression of that thing, you know? I probably wouldn't bring my 10-year-old to a Lady Gaga concert for me. I just don't think it's appropriate for his age, right? But if some other parent brought her kid to that, it's not my life to live. I don't think it's grooming, right? And so that's the difference, is like, parents will have different thresholds for what they think is appropriate for their children, as long as, you know, we're within, like, not seriously harming kids, obviously, but there's a pretty big spectrum there, and parents have a right to do that despite what you might or might not think. Anyway, end of rant there.
No, 100%.
This was not the intent. And all of a sudden, it just, everybody's going after the children, trying to, I want to say it's a strong word, but indoctrinate them with this ideology. It's not just about accepting who these people are. It's an
ideology.
Ever.
They keep saying that phrase. They won't define it. It's the trans ideology is just the 2020s edition of the gay agenda. It's undefined, and it's meant to scare you.
It's wokeism, right? It's like, well, what is that? Well, we know it when we see it. It's like, all right.
That comes along with it.
Well,
there's so much that we could talk about and say, and I'm going to leave that link in the description for everybody to check out. I actually haven't watched it yet, and I just heard about it because of Frank. So
all right, I think she's pretty much wrapped up here. Let me skip ahead.
Exceedingly bothered by child trafficking. I have 2 girls myself, and there's a reality there that I have to see, you know, to know how to protect them and protect my family, you know. So, but yeah, I'll leave that in the description. Check it out, guys. And Frank's book, I will also leave a description.
Okay, we can call this one a day. There's like 2 minutes left, and I think we got what we need to hear. Friends, let me just say, it's 2.5 hours. We just watched the Lord of the Rings movie, and the worst, like the worst version of one, right? So thank you, first off, Billy, for hanging out with me for 2.5 hours. I didn't know we were gonna go this long, but this happened when me and my friend Riley did a response to Ali Stuckey on one of her podcasts. It was a 2-part podcast response that was 3 hours total, because there's so much to unpack, because there are so many claims made with so little data, right? Like, if you notice, Frank did not even cite the Swedish study. He just said, okay, this is the stat. This is the stat. There's so many things that were undefined, and when you do that, you can just go. So I wanted to take time with you, Billy, to really go through it, you know, detailed. And I'm not very detailed, okay? This was a struggle for me to get through 2.5 hours. But I want to have this on the internet. I'm going to post it as a podcast, I think, as well, because people need to hear not only just someone who is trans, which obviously you are, but also someone who is academic and understands the research and can speak to these things to give counterpoints. Now, if Frank and Melissa want to argue these points, they can, but they have to provide data. We need actual studies. We need sources. Okay, everything that we shared has a link with the source that you can look into. We're not trying to be disingenuous. We're not trying to lie. We're trying to be truthful, which I think, put in the best way, I would say maybe Frank and Melissa were a little sloppy in their presentation.
Yeah, I was going to say, if they do another video, would they please at least do us the favor of putting links to all of their sources in the video, please. Make my life easier next time we have to do this.
Awesome. Well, listen, I'm not going to belabor the point. Billy, again, thank you so much for making time. Friends, thanks for watching. If you like this video, you can share it. You can subscribe to our channel, or you can shoot me a message and tell me what you think. I'm going to sign off. I'm going to die. And Billy, we'll talk more later on.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right. See ya.